it from the link that was sent out to members. When I invite someone to speak, can you clearly state your name for the benefit of anybody who's listening to the meeting remotely so they can identify who you are? I also warmly welcome any members of the public and media who are joining us today. This meeting will be recorded and available afterwards. As agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding appropriate information if we need to go trawling through the papers. Okay, I think that's first housekeeping out of the way. We don't do a fire alarm thing, do we, these days? No? Okay, that's good. Onwards and upwards. Right, first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Pauline Ham, and I think... and
we've also had Henry
subbing. With Councillor Hobhouse substituting. Thank you, Henry.
We've had apologies from Councillor Lance Doddridge and Councillor Tom Power.
Do we have substitutes for them?
No.
They've pulled out this morning, I think so. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Are there any comments on them? Oh, thank you. On first page, second page, the work programme and the 6 months budget monitoring. Next page is the HRA Q2 budget monitoring. Next page is Housing Development Team devolution update. And the final page is transformation update. Any comments, or are you happy that I sign them as an accurate record? Proposed by Simon Coles, seconded by Surya Ayuja. Beg your pardon, I don't know. Oh. Ordula, I do beg your pardon. Right, I will sign those. Okay, next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest in respect of today's meeting? Over and above the ones that are normal. Good. And none of those. And public question time. We have two public questions, but I have they've asked if they could come before the customer complaints policy and annual customer feedback reports, which is item 8. So we will take them then. I'm not aware of any other. Am I, Jenny? Okay, thank you. Right. Well, before we get into the meeting proper and look at the work programme, I just need to report to you that we had a very successful meeting. Some members of the committee went to the CCTV office in Bridgewater the other day. Absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that more visits can be arranged for councillors either on this committee or those who have CCTV in their communities, or just have a general interest in this. The operation seems to be very slick, very professional, and I was hugely impressed by it. And of course, I think most of the councils that are now contributing to the costs of it to help it running are equally impressed. So you do get the opportunity, or if you want the opportunity, get in touch with Jenny and she will help sort something out. Right, the next item on the agenda is the work programme. And as you can see, for the 12th of March, we've got the management of open spaces, customer service contact centre response times, HRA housing landlord options appraisal, and the normal budget update. Looking forward, there are other items there. Devolution progression, which is something that will come back to us on a fairly regular basis. Income generations equally, particularly the relationships and devolution arrangements with parish councils. Updates on the devolution of particular assets, and you will have seen the decision yesterday for the devolution of assets to Wells City. Other items on the list, which I think some of were added last time, are devolution service level agreements, a joint meeting with Climate and Place in relation to the Glastonbury Festival wash-up. The visit to the CCTV has now been undertaken, but if any other councillors, as I say, who weren't able to make it still wish to, that can be sorted out. And there's a question mark over air quality, which I think we're going to try and bottom out outside these meetings to see what's necessary. Are there any other items that are burning your hole in your consciences that you think this committee ought to be looking at? I suppose that's good in a way, because there's enough to keep us occupied for the next few meetings. Obviously, if there is anything that comes up in your day-to-day business, please either get in touch with Jenny or myself, and we can consider and take it forward, understand what's going on. Okay, next item on the agenda is the budget monitoring report from Christian Evans and Kerry Happel, who will be telling us about how the money's going. Christian?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So Chris Evans, Head of Finance Business Partnering. And as the Chair said, I've got Kerry Happel with me, who's the Finance Service Manager. So this is the month 7 budget monitoring report. For information, we're not reporting month 8 externally. So the next budget monitoring report to committee will be month 9. I'll cover corporately first. So corporately, we're reporting an underspend of 8.782 million. That's a 303,000 improvement from month 6. There is an overspend, as is well documented, of 8.38 million in children's services, and there is an overspend predicted at the moment in climate and place. This is being offset by underspends in adult social care, and we are requiring less borrowing at the moment due to the reduction in the capital programme, which is saving money, and also an increase in the income on treasury management due to the increased interest rates. So on the face of it, that is good news, as we are reporting underspend. However, £6 million of that is an underspend, unused contingency. And to balance the budget in 24-25, we had to use 39.499 million in reserves, and also a use of a capitalisation direction of 36.884 million. So the underspend will actually just reduce the amount of reserves we need to balance the budget for 24-25. So moving on to community services specifically. So the net budget for 24-25 is 34.412 million. Currently, we are predicting an underspend of 1.466 million. So that is a decrease of 106,000 from month 6. Housing is currently forecasted on budget. Also, that's the same for customer services. Cultural services forecasting underspend of nearly 1.2 million. Again, that's fairly well documented around the underspend on the leisure contracts. And then regulatory and operational services are forecasting underspend of 280,000. That hasn't actually moved as a prediction since month 6. One of the things I did promise in the last scrutiny meeting was that we would put forward all of the medium-term financial plan savings. So we've listed those. So just a quick summary. So of the £2.866 million, which is baked into the 24-25 budget of savings, so far achieved and on track is 88%, and at risk is 12%. So there is a slide on the unachievable and at-risk savings. So unachievable savings. So Taunton Visitor Centre, there is a duplication of the income budget on that of 114,000. There are some risks within Lifelines services of 106,000 and regulatory and ops of 119,000. Then on there is another appendix which shows each individual MTFP saving, which I said I would provide. So there's a whistle-stop tour. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, open to members of the committee. Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have an unachievable saving where there was a duplication in the, from what I can see, two different sources of budget were trying for the same saving. I don't quite understand how this got through the system if it was through two separate budgets. Is there any chance of an explanation?
Thank you, Henry. I don't know. I mean, we have been plagued occasionally with duplicate entries. I don't know who wishes to pick that one up. Is it one for you, Chris, or one for Christian?
Just to quickly say, the budget process is very complex. Obviously, bringing 5 legacy councils together, there are a number of difficulties in understanding the budgets for every council, knowledge-wise, and so sometimes there are, on occasion, there are some duplications. As we learn more through the years, it does take a long time to understand all of the budgets. We will be ironing out. There are areas in other services as well. But we say we are ironing these out as part of the budget process.
Yeah, I think, Henry, one of the frustrations we had certainly last year was these sort of double entries or ghost entries, if you like, were coming in. And when I asked whether the accountancy system could cope with just taking it out and resetting it, I was told that wasn't possible. The budget was the budget was the budget. So if it's in on April the 1st, you're stuck with it. And it throws up these kind of things. Is that a fair point, Christian?
Yeah, once the budget is agreed by full council, that is the budget then for from the 1st of April for that year, and then you can make viaments and move budgets around, etc. But it's still the same net budget. So you're just moving things around really, and then you try and iron them out the following year.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Dawn.
Good point. I think probably it's the top one is probably for the calendar year and the next one is the financial year. So we will look at those and we will align them. And if you wish, if you've got the data, we'll perhaps look back to 23, 24 as well to continue. So we'll work with the service to try and improve that.
Need to say that again? Sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't put my mic on. Apologies, everyone. I was just asking Christian about how they choose the periods that they represent on their graphs. So particularly on page 22, you've got 2 different tables with 2 different date lines. And we think one's a calendar year, one's a financial year, but saying it'd be useful to have consistency in terms of trend data. It just makes me suspicious when I see them start at different times as to why don't they start earlier on one. If there's something that's missing, that's just me being very suspicious. And also asking for some trend data.
Yeah, we will try and get some comparative data for 23, 24, and we'll work with the service on that so you can see separate lines. So yeah, we'll take that forward, yeah.
Okay, Wes Reed, please.
Thank you, Chair. Christian, under the cultural services, you've got a line there for visitor centres showing under achievement in red. Can you just explain that one, please? Thank you.
Yeah, that's the duplication error I mentioned earlier on. So what happened that basically the income was put in twice. So that then became a very ambitious target. Yeah, that's the reason why that will be unachievable, and hopefully we're looking to see whether any mitigations can be put in place by using some of the underspends elsewhere. As we said, that won't be resolved this year, but we'll pick it up as part of the budget process for 25, 26.
Okay, thank you.
Dawn, so you wanted to come back?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking that Appendix A, is that part of this item? which gives all the community services agreed savings in detail? Or is that another, I couldn't quite work out if that was a different item. After page 24, you've got this appendix A. I was just.
The appendix A is all the medium-term financial
Yeah.
plan savings. Yeah, that's it.
So, I just wanted to say, I think that's really, really useful. I don't think I've ever seen that level of detail of where the savings are coming from, and I thought that was really interesting. Slightly concerning that some of those are one-offs, which aren't going to be achievable in another year. I don't know if you can comment as to what sort of portion you feel are ongoing savings and what are not to be found again.
So we just, do you want to,
So the majority of them are ongoing. The Octagon one is slightly variable, of course, because it's dependent upon the regeneration scheme. So we have reduced the operating budget for the Octagon. This is what you'll see in that line. However, if the Octagon were to reopen, the reopening of it is doomed to be a transfer across to the Yeovil Town Council. So at the moment, that's a variable and it's subject to the Octagon staying closed. In the event of the money coming through the redevelopment scheme, the Octagon reopens and transfers, and then we'll have to reassess how much of the council budget is then reduced as part of that transfer. So in theory, that should only grow, but it's heavily dependent upon that government grant.
Okay. Right. Any other members in the room who wish to comment?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know whether I should bring it up or not, Chair, but are we still in these risks, the risks are all in red? Are they still in red today? This is October. It's just bothering me, this all, just seeing red risks everywhere. Not just the odd one, there's about half a dozen, if not more. Or is this just acceptable?
But can I just double check which page you're on? The only red I can find with a column is against the
I'm on
visitor
page
center.
21, and I keep seeing a table full of red risks, and we seem to be just ignoring it. Is this acceptable, or is this?
So they aren't red risks. What we're identifying is that area of expenditure is over the current budget, but is balanced by underspends elsewhere. So you'll see that the net position for this overall budget is still a saving to the council. There are some of those areas that we've been unable to control. So housing, as an example, they are showing 2 areas of overspend, but we've also got government grant that's been provided, held in a separate earmark reserve, and will be called down to fund those areas. So government have given us money to do a specific thing. We're doing that thing, and we will call off the grant in order to fund that. So the council's no worse off. We've got other areas. Visitor centre is the one we've identified already, and then a few other areas of overspend in regs and ops, but they are being offset within the budget. So it's not that it's a good thing. Clearly, any overspend needs to be managed and controlled. Some of those are harder to control than others, and the service directors are finding equivalent savings and more from other parts of their budget responsibility.
I may come back, Chair. So if this was to be brought up to date, there'd be a lot of changes. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Some of them, coroners, as an example, we can't control the number of autopsies that are undertaken. That budget is costing us more. We are having to find savings from elsewhere. We'll still report coroners as an overspend. All the time it's overspent, we will report that transparently, but we will find savings from elsewhere within the budget separately in regs and ops. So it will stay red.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've got a better understanding of it now. Sorry for asking.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think we all need to be literally on the same page here. So I think that's very helpful. I mean, the other side of the coin, of course, is the underspend. If we budget to spend money, why have we not spent it? What is the problem? What's holding us back? And will that sort of knock on into further years? So I think, scrutinising and looking at all the anomalies here is very important. The other thing that need to remember, of course, is that, as you say, this is a couple of months old already, and things have moved on. And as Chris said, money will be moving around. Chris and Christian say money will be moving around behind the scenes. So the final picture will hopefully look a little bit better than this, although actually in the grand scheme of things, we are achieving an underspend against the budget was allocated to communities at the beginning of the year, which under the circumstances has to be a good thing, as long as we're not losing too much in the process. Marcus Cravers, please.
I was trying very hard not to say anything on this side of the agenda. I mean, I suppose the question there is, our services, in response to what you've just said there, is our services suffering because of these underspends? I think is the other way of putting it as well, because we're not spending the money. On this £114,000 extra, it's 114,000 extra income on the visitor centre. Obviously, in the scheme of budgets, in some ways, it's not a lot of money. In other ways, it's an awful lot of money. It's probably what the brew house used to get, I should think. And I wonder, and my question, I suppose, is we're just looking at this, this budget. How many more duplications do we find within the budget? You know, generally, is it an extraordinary situation, or are there several little 100,000s kicking around that suddenly we're having to find underspends for? Or also, do we ever have them where it's the other way around? So it could have quite easily been a minus figure. So if I wasn't speaking to the microphone,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming, as Christian said, the difficulties of amalgamating 5 councils, 4 of them with different functions from the 5th, must be immense. Now, as Somerset was treated as a continuity council, I'm assuming that all the former county council budgets would have been transferred across without too much difficulty, but actually finding out how 4 different districts all did their same business in different ways and mixing that into a coordinated budget. Or should we just say, I'm not sure I'd want to do that. Christian, is there anything you wish to add?
If I may, so the visitor centre one, that is to do with an MTFP saving that was put forward quite late into the budget setting process in anticipation of 24-25. So you will recall there were a range of MTFP savings that were discussed at full council. This is one of those. There's income for CCTV, there was visitor centre, there was a range of others. So it's gone into the budget setting process quite late. I don't say that as an excuse, just as an observation that some of these errors have occurred because of the speed at which these changes were made late into the budget setting process. In terms of our services suffering as a result of the underspends, the council is under a clear direction. All services are to stop spending money unless it is a statutory responsibility or a health and safety function. So the very simple answer to the question is yes. Services are reducing their outputs. We are holding vacancies. We are spending less money deliberately in order to try and keep the overall council's budget balanced. You also asked about whether there were duplications in the other direction. So whilst I haven't got an immediate answer to that, I'm not aware of any positive duplications per se, but we are aware that the leisure budget underspend is born out of that budget is too high for the contracts that we are servicing from it. So we've known that for a period of time. That is effectively a positive error, and that's why it's being reported as an underspend, because effectively we were given too much budget than we needed. So that one is one of those arguably positive problems, but that's why it's been reported as an underspend. The council gets the benefit of that. The money doesn't disappear. But that's the only example I've got in that area.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Any other members in the room wish to speak? All right. Andy Dingwall online then, please. Morning, Andy.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me speak. A couple of quick questions. The first is around one of the underspends. Street cleaning is one of the underspends, about 360,000 in there. I can kind of pull together about 80,000 of achieved savings relating to street cleaning within the savings report, the risk report for savings. But I can't quite place the rest of them. Is that reduction in service, or is that to do with devolution? Because I had assumed that the savings from devolution were baked into the budget at the start. The second question is very similar, around CCTV contributions, which is the first line in the risk report on page 26. I had assumed that had already been the devolution for the town councils to pay for that had been baked into the budget, so it can't be a saving in this budget, the 24-25 budget, because it had already been accounted for, if that makes sense. The third and final point is a bit of a request for the report, actually, for particularly that risk report, for the savings to be grouped by service rather than, I think they're currently grouped by the date that they were approved. There's lots of, obviously the budget report comes in blocks of service, regulatory operations and so on. It would be much easier to read, I think, if that were done.
Okay, and yeah, I think you're certainly, the point about the grouping would be very helpful. Chris, do you want to answer the other points, please?
Yeah, in terms of street cleaning, so there were some additional works that were being asked of one of the previous district councils around street cleaning from ID Verdi. So we've cancelled those additional works. They were non-contractual, but nevertheless delivered by an external contractor. So we've cancelled those additions. There's also some mid-year savings around the devolution to Bridgewater Town Council. So some of that has happened, and other smaller devolutions, we're starting to see the savings crop up. It was always very difficult costing the true saving of a devolution package. We were having to make some assumptions on the number of people, the number of vehicles, the number of materials, the number of fuel, insurance, etc., etc. So we're starting to see some of those come through as positives, and we've made some conscious reductions as we were requested to do. So that makes up the street cleaning one. The CCTV one, just want to remind everyone, we have not devolved CCTV. So Somerset Council still delivers a CCTV service. What we have are financial contributions coming in from the various city, towns and parish councils that receive that service. So it's an income. I completely take your point. It was taken out of the budget, but nevertheless, we record all MTFP savings across the council in this universal fashion. So on track. I mean, I have made the previous plea that they're moved into achieved because they were in fact taken from the budget, but they're being reported in a universal fashion across all services, and that's why it's in that column. And similarly with the grouping, I completely get it. We'll have a conversation with our finance colleagues, but this isn't the only place this table goes. So again, we just need to make sure that if we're going to report in a slightly different fashion, we update the source data so that all of those tables are positively impacted by it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Are there any other questions or queries for Chris or Christian? Okay, well, thank you everybody for your questions. Thanks for Chris and Christian for the answers. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7. And Sarah Dowden will give us a report or an update on the environmental health service within the council. Sarah?
Morning, everyone. Yeah, just here to do a fairly quick run through of the environmental health service. And I know in previous scrutinies, there's been some questions raised for all sorts of different areas of environmental health. It's quite a varied area, so I'm trying to touch on as much as I can, but please feel free to ask any questions at the end. So what is environmental health? I don't need to read this through for you, but you can see on there we cover a great deal of everything. If we're looking across other authorities across the country, I would say that we operate a fairly standard environmental health service. We include private sector housing within our environmental health team. We also pick up envirocrime and what I would call the operational area of antisocial behaviour, all fairly common. In some areas, you wouldn't have services like public health, funerals, and the abandoned vehicles that we also pick up. So that's slightly different, but as a whole, you could replicate what we've got here across the rest of the country in environmental health. So our main risks for us at the moment, again, they're up there on the screen. Outstanding food hygiene inspections. So if you work as a food safety officer, you're generally required to carry out a number of statutory food hygiene inspections every year, and that is audited and overseen by the Food Standards Agency, which is a national organisation. Since in this financial year, we have dropped on some of our outstanding inspections. So we have a list of outstanding inspections that we are required to advise the Food Standards Agency of. And we're currently working with them to help them to understand and us to understand what we can do, excuse me, to get towards a position where by the end of this financial year, we will finish on target for those inspections. The main area of outstanding inspections for us at Somerset is the new businesses. So once a new business registers, they have 28 days for us to go and visit them and carry out a food hygiene inspection. That's written in law, so it's pretty stringent. Some of you may obviously be aware that when someone starts a new business, you may be really excited and keen and send your food standards registration form to us straight away and to the Food Standards Agency. And with the best of intentions, you will not be ready to trade within 28 days. That presents a problem for us because the time starts ticking as soon as that registration form arrives at the Food Standards Agency and on our system. So that is the reason why sometimes we show a large number of outstanding new business inspections. What often in the background is happening and what our systems show is that the staff are keeping in touch with the new food business owners to make sure they're understanding that they cannot open until we have had a conversation with them and been to check out their premises. We'll talk about it a little bit later on, but a mobile solution in this area will make a huge difference to the staff that are currently carrying out that role. Another new piece of legislation that's coming in this year is the Renters' Rights Bill. So it'll be live spring to summer this year. So that's going to increase the workload in that private rented sector. There is a small amount of funding that local authorities get, and we're talking about kind of 15 to 20 hours per local authority to get the lead officers up to speed on what is required as part of that bill. And we've obviously accepted that with open arms. We have a duty within the housing team to make sure that we are carrying out the requirements within that bill, and it will see an improved set of circumstances for those in the private rented sector. So it's really important that we do deliver on this. We're also exploring the work that we can do with trading standards. So our colleagues in trading standards, which now form part of the regulatory and operational services, have a power under the private rented bill to support and carry out some enforcement work. So we're trying to make sure that as an authority we've got one version of the truth going forward. And then we have the abandoned vehicle complaint. So again, we've got a duty to remove abandoned vehicles on private land or on our own land. And this generates a large amount of work for us across Somerset, as you can probably imagine. It is largely a service that we have to support funding wise. We can get, it says on there, a small income stream. So if we happen to get abandoned vehicles that are worth some money, we could sell them back to the trade, and actually we can generate an income is the wrong word. It's more like just trying to offset the costs that we incur from doing this. All local authorities handle these abandoned vehicle complaints differently. So we're still trying to bring all the systems together to try and make sure that we're doing this the right way. Reducing all of our services in environmental health does look different in different areas, and we're quite broad. So, for example, back in the old days, often a food safety officer would go out and do an advisory visit to a food business premises free of charge, without a shadow of a doubt, talk to them, spend time making sure they understand the requirements that they're expected to fulfil. That service is not carried out anymore. So we can carry out advisory services, but there is a charge to that. So if you're a food safety officer working for Somerset Council, it does feel different now. And we are now not doing, many years we haven't done school talks and other public engagement to try and focus on the wider aspects of environmental health. It's now more about the processes. So touched on some of these already. There are some issues we've got, mainly some legacy issues. We've got 5 aging legacy property databases. This makes data accuracy a real problem, especially when we're trying to give members and internal and external customers one version of the truth. We're having to pull from 5 different systems, and that's causing challenges internally. We've also got a large range of different policies and procedures across environmental health. So where in the north we may do something one way and the systems are set up to manage that, in the south we do it a completely different way. when we are starting now to move to one team, one approach, it's really difficult for team members to have to flex these systems to make them all work for us. So getting the property databases in one place is something that we've got to try and focus on for this year and into next year, because it is starting to become a problem for us. Differing policies and procedures we're picking up as we go along. So we've started this year with the unauthorised encampment work. Last year we picked up the Gypsy and Traveller unauthorised encampment work. Sorry, we got that through last year, and we're working on the abandoned vehicles work this year. The external factors that we're having to continually work through is the increased use of statutory services. So more demand in our areas in housing and the private rented sector, more demand on our stray dog service, more demand particularly in the public health funeral work that we do. So these are all areas that are statutory services, and we are facing greater impact on those services. So what we're having to do is work through contracts, work with other partners to try and make sure that we are making the service as less resource intensive as possible. There's also in environmental health, not as significant as other areas of the council, but there are issues with recruitment and getting qualified officers in. So historically, we have tried to bring graduates into the service and train them to make sure that we work them in a way that works for us. Trying to fill posts is always a challenge, and I'll mention it in a minute, but the new structure will see some opportunities in environmental health, which may mean some staff move on within our organisation and become a senior staff, but it will mean that we need to make sure we are focusing on that recruitment of the staff in behind those that are moving on within the organisation. And then I guess the internal factor is having that resource to undertake service transformation going forward. So when we talk about new systems, when we talk about mobile solutions, when we talk about trying to get our processes online so that customers can access whatever they need to access whenever they need to do it, that takes time, that takes resource internally, and that's going to be the challenge, is how we dedicate that resource to make sure that we can keep moving forward as a service. So opportunities we've got, mentioned it just then, technology will make a huge difference. There's a wider organisational rollout in 2025 of Copilot, which will hopefully free up time for staff to be able to focus on what we're employing them to do and give their technical knowledge to the roles. And we're hoping to work with customer service team to work out what we can move online and what can be handled centrally as some of our complaints and processes. Licensing, taxi and street trading policies are all starting to be harmonised, which again will help slicken the processes for the teams dealing with it. And we're trying to work out how we can get the task allocation right. So in different teams, currently there is different expectations for those individuals working in those teams. So if I use the food as an example again, if you're in the north, you're probably expected to pick up maybe 20 to 25 food inspections a month, and if you work in another area, it's probably slightly less than that, and that is because of the balance of the other work those individuals in those teams are doing. We're just trying to work through that as a team so that we can understand what the main priorities are and the risks in those teams. But that's across the board, where you've got 5 areas coming into one. Lots of contract harmonisation. So licensing, there's a system called Mogo, which is going to go live, which will allow the whole process when someone applies for a taxi licence to be completed online and the plate sent out to the individuals rather than it coming to the office or the individual having to come into an office, and the taxi plates need to be printed internally. So those sorts of processes will hopefully be an improved customer experience and also save us some time internally as well. We've gone through a new kennelling contract in Somerset because there's been some changes around the XL bully breeds and the requirements that have brought in there. So we've led to a piece of work with St Giles Kennels, and we're currently going through a tender for our private health funerals to work out and understand what we need in Somerset in terms of that provision. And then, as always, it's that continued joined up working with partner agencies and directorates. So talked through the work we do with the Food Standards Agency, and it's pretty key to making sure that food programme stays on track, and they are really helpful. And we cannot underestimate the work that we can do with internal teams, customer services and IT around using the technology that we have available to us within this organisation already, and the knowledge base from the staff that work there. So I just thought I'd pick up on the structure, because I know we'll ask for this when we talked through it. So from the 1st of April 25, how are we going to look in environmental health? Well, there's not going to be a large reduction in numbers. So that was my priority, is to try and keep people on the ground doing the job that we are doing. The biggest pressure has absolutely been on the management level. So within environmental health, what we have done is said, rather than keep us all working in our areas, we are working in themes across the whole of Somerset. So that has meant that you have one food manager, one environmental health manager, one housing manager, one environmental crime manager, and one licensing manager. That will help bring it all together. Otherwise, we will be operating largely in a district role going forward. So that's what we've done. What that means is that managers have been asked to pick up a large number of environmental health officers within their teams. What we did as a result of the restructure is put in some additional resource under the manager between the officer, so a senior role in those teams to help support the managers, because what I don't want is the manager falling over because of the amount of people that they are trying to manage and the work programme they are trying to control. So particularly in areas where we have the statutory returns in housing and in food, we are making sure we have senior officers in there to keep those programmes on track going forward, because we need just that focus, the focus there. And again, those key areas for us, picking up unauthorised encampments as a team is really key, as well as picking up abandoned vehicles as a team is really key. So at the moment we have specific people doing specific roles, and we are trying to just bring all that in together. That's it. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much for a quick gallop through the service. Members of the committee, are there any questions or queries you'd like to raise? Oh, Susanna? Susanna Hart?
Hi there. So can I just ask you a couple of little questions, please, Sarah? I see there that you put up a figure saying a 250% increase in complaints about illegal encampments, unauthorised encampments, abandoned vehicles. Okay. I mean, definitely speaking from my perspective as someone representing Glastonbury, I suspect, well, A, that is a big number. And B, I suspect that a lot of that is repeat complaints about things that residents, areas where they see no change despite reporting, repeatedly reporting. That's the first one. Sorry, I've got 4.
Deal with that?
Yeah, can do. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd need to look into the detail of it. With abandoned vehicles, what tends to happen is it's either abandoned or it isn't. So when we get the complaint, we do a check on the police national database to understand if there's an owner or not. Obviously, where there is an owner, we are unable to take any action. So yeah, that absolutely could be the case. But I haven't got the detail here, but you're right. That could be happening.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, in many instances, they appear abandoned. You guys try to find out whether they're abandoned. Someone pops up and goes, oh, actually, I own it, even though they're not in it, and then they vanish again. But from a resident's perspective, those are dilapidated vehicles that sit there month on month, year on year. And then, sadly, the reality is, even once they do get removed, eventually, all that happens is something else comes and sticks itself in the place. So it's a really depressing, cyclical situation. And I don't know how. I hope you've got some plan up your sleeve for getting on top of it.
I think that is the exact problem we face, is that if we don't have that regulatory duty or ability to cover it, that is exactly what happens. So you lose something somewhere and something else raises up in that space again.
Can I just jump in here? Because I had a career in environmental health for all of 11 months, and one of my jobs in that was dealing with abandoned vehicles. Now, my recollection from the legislation was, it was not, well, the legislation we were working under was from 1967, and The vehicle you didn't have to establish an owner, but the key thing, well, you could try and find an owner, but the key thing was whether it was taxed, and you can find that out online. But you also said that you had power to remove them from private land, which I didn't think was possible. But one of the difficulties is that you put your notice on, the notice has to be on the car for 7 days. If it's moved or somebody comes forward to say it's mine and it's taxed, then that's the end of the matter. It's not legally an abandoned vehicle. It may be a complete eyesore, but I mean, that's where that part of the process comes to a grinding halt, along with the vehicle. So the powers we have in this area are probably based on a sort of 1960s, 1970s scenario, which is probably not appropriate for where we are today. But I don't know, am I somewhere near?
Yeah, spot on.
I mean, there is the whole issue of the fact that a caravan is not supposed to be at the side of the road without a vehicle attached to it anyway. So that in itself is illegal, but it goes on and on and on. Anyway, I think we all kind of know the situation. I just wanted to mention that I wonder whether that huge increase is partly repeat complaints, but what we can do about actually solving the problem, I'd be interested to know. Also, where you're talking about a kind of new structure or additional members to the team to regulate unauthorised encampments, where can we see the details of who these team members are and what their responsibilities are, please?
So the restructure is currently, the consultation has ended, but the restructure hasn't been put out loud yet. So at the moment, there is no further detail that we can share with you.
And so when is that likely to actually exist?
4th of February.
Thank you. Sorry, am I like, I've still got 2 questions.
Apologies, I interjected. So that will be with the new structure with names and places and posts, is that right?
It will definitely be with posts from the 4th.
The recruitment process is still going through, but we will know how many officers we're going to have in a particular place for a particular function. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And then I was just wondering, I don't know whether this is part of us, but it sounds like it is from the whole stray dog thing. This harmonising term that I saw there. So as I understand it, and I don't know if this is specifically your responsibility, the PSPOs around dog fouling, that there's a consultation out at the moment. That's trying to be brought under one umbrella so that it's the same across the whole of Somerset. And whilst I can see the rationale for that to a certain degree, at the same time, different places have different problems. Glastonbury is a prime example. And it isn't always appropriate for one blanket policy to cover, because if the problem is different, how can the solution have parity across the whole area?
Yeah, so the harmonisation referred to there is around the stray dog kennelling contracts rather than the PSPOs, which are different in different areas currently. So with the stray dog contract, that is about having the 4 districts had 3 different providers, 2 different providers, but under 4 different contracts. So what we were trying to do is a piece of work where we say, actually, let's go out to tender and try and get the provider to be the same, or at least have 2 because of the size of Somerset. What's happened as a result of that, and as a result of the XL bully law coming in, is that one of those providers said, actually, we're out. We cannot provide the service that you now require. So that piece of work was actually, we now have 1 kennelling contract for Somerset, but that is just relating to the kennelling of stray dogs and nothing else.
So that is my last question. That is around my last question. Can I? Oh, sorry. Oh, that's a whole other question, maybe for another time. Well, that was my final question was going to be, please, could you give me what the definition of a stray dog is? Because particularly in Glastonbury, it's another grey area.
So a stray dog would be one that is roaming the streets and is either collected by a member of the public or the police. And then we have a duty to hold it for a period of time to see if an owner comes forward.
So your definition is a dog that is roaming the streets with no obvious owner?
Yeah,
or
with,
just
yeah,
a
with,
dog
I mean,
that
it
is
has, to,
roaming
it
the
has to kind of
streets?
be on the streets to the point that a member of the public, so it varies because if I drive around my neighbourhood and I see a dog that I know lives around the corner and he's probably just come out to sniff the grass on the verge, I'll probably drive by and go, actually, he's going to find his way back because he's been there forever. Someone else might see him sat there and think, oh, actually, that dog is missing or lost. I'm going to put him in my car and I'm going to ring the council, and the council will have to come out and collect the dog from my house, and then they're going to have to take it to their kennels, which could be a 2-hour drive away. And then the individual that owns it at some point is going to think, my dog hasn't come back. There's going to be a series of panicked phone calls, and someone's going to say, actually, it's been put in the kennels, and here's a bill for the time that we have looked after your dog for. So the definition of a stray dog is very difficult because we get presented with stray dogs at different times. Other things that happen is our CCTV service will ring us and say, there's been a dog tied to a lamppost in a random street, i.e. not outside a shop in Bridgewater for 7 hours now. And we have to then make a decision as a council, right, are we considering that is straying? A dog out of the control of an owner is straying. So if it's not on a lead or it's not visibly nearby, it would be considered straying. But it is really difficult because some people will pick every dog up they see that's on its own and some people won't.
Thank you. I guess I'm thinking more of your final definition there, a dog out of control of the owner. So what we've got is problems with dogs that are never put on leads, are not kept in a house, and then go on to savage people and animals. And so I'm trying to find out whether those dogs come under your kind of definition of stray dogs.
So if there's an issue with a dangerous dog, it's likely a matter for the police. If it's dog to person, if it's dog on dog,
police will say contact
Yeah,
you guys.
and we'll have a conversation with the police about particular circumstances, because we make sure we have those conversations, because in those areas often they overlap quite a lot. So we do speak to the police about dog attacks of any type.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers.
Thanks. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, one of the things about environmental health is that nothing is ever particularly black and white, and there are lots of nuances. So the service needs to be adaptable and flexible so that it can deal with a dog that's tied up to a lamppost, one that's growling at people, and this plays out right across the whole field of responsibilities of the service, actually. So, you know, the officers do need to be in a position to be able to make informed decisions and have the delegated authority to take those decisions on the cuff without having to sort of reflect it upwards, because urgency is often quite important in these matters. So thank you for that. Thank you for raising it. Hazel Prior-Sankey, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's interesting. I saw something on a news feed the other day that where a dog had been picked up and, you know, was definitely had a home, and in the end the owners put a notice on the collar. I'm wandering, tell me to go home, I'm definitely not lost, which I thought was interesting. And I guess, I mean, all dogs should have a collar on and they should all have a tag. That is the law, so that most people seeing a stray dog would just ring the number on the tag. But then dogs do lose them. I bought a fair few over my time. That wasn't really my question. My question is around the issue of abandoned vehicles on private land. Are you actually saying that as a council we have a duty to remove abandoned vehicles? And I'm presuming you're not talking about caravans, because that's not a vehicle, or is it? Abandoned vehicles from private land? I'm just totally, that's completely and absolutely new to me.
Yeah, so we can do, the duty is on our land or on public land. The power, it sits elsewhere. I'd probably not pick up caravans in this meeting, and we probably talk about that separately, because caravans form, yeah.
So we definitely have the power, but not the duty to remove on private land. So do we do that?
I have no idea what the current statistics are showing, I'm afraid, but I can find out.
Thank you. Susanna again?
Well,
Oh,
this-
sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to, this was a question back to you, Chair. So earlier you said, has anyone got anything that they'd like to, for the group to be able to discuss in the future? Sarah just said that caravans. I have got it switched off.
Councillor Lawrence, could you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you. Mute, please.
Sorry, Sarah just. Sarah. Shall I turn this off? Oh, okay. Sarah said that caravans were a different, something that we should discuss differently. Is that something I could ask that we put onto, because earlier you asked for things for the agenda?
Yes, caravans.
I can do.
How long do we need?
Well, I'm just wondering if caravans are a specific problem in a particular area and whether it's better to have another meeting or a conversation with members around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the committee, exists to look across the piece at the council, and I'm more than happy to look at any issues that are brought forward. On the other hand, I think if there is a specific problem in a specific ward, then that needs to be dealt with under a council call for action or something like that to really get escalated and get to the nub of the problem. Because what we here are supposed to do, I think, is to look at the policies that the council has in place for particular things and how it deals with them. So I think probably we need a sort of a general discussion, perhaps between you, me and Sarah after the meeting, or with Chris, to bottom this out and see where the best place to resolve it would be. Chris?
We really need a clear scope, because we can have a conversation about caravans, but we really unpick what is the problem. Is it caravans and dwellings? Is it obstructions on the highway? If we ask Sarah to do it, it's going to come from a regulatory, this is what the abandoned vehicle policy says, and it will have no reflection on how we might treat people who are using them as temporary or permanent accommodation. So if we can understand the scope, then obviously we can lay on the right things. If I may, I have put the abandoned vehicle link in the chat for this call and for this meeting, and also the stray dogs regulations. I put a link in there. And the other one, just to pick up on, in terms of abandoned vehicles on private land, it's the landowner that would usually request us to remove them. So I couldn't request that my neighbour removes a vehicle from their driveway, but they could say someone has abandoned their vehicle on my land, and they would be the one requesting the council use their powers to remove it.
Okay, thank you. I think that sort of clears it up. Dawn Johnson, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Such a wide scope, isn't it, as an area? I was just trying to work out really how much of this is statutory. Most of it is statutory, is it? Then there's very little that we do beyond statutory.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just also, I know you've got the restructure going on, but trying to imagine the size of this team and the number of people and whether they're all employees of the council or whether they are quite often contracting.
Yeah, so within environmental health at the moment, we may have one contractor working for us, but they're all establishment employees. So there's around 100 to 120 staff within environmental health, different gradings, all working together. For example, so the food safety team, because we've done quite a lot of work on that in the restructure, there's one manager and FT of around 17 in that team that deals with all the food complaints, all the food sampling, all the water sampling that's done across Somerset, as well as all the food hygiene inspections, and the other 4 or 5 teams that pick up housing, licensing, environmental protection and enviro crime, all vary in size from around 9 FTE and then up to the food team, which is the highest at 17 FTE. So it's a quite a sizable chunk of people. In addition, the admin support or the regulatory support officers in that area also vary from they're not just kind of typists or phone call responders. They are people that do work, pick up low level enforcement activity for us as well. So they form part of the the figures and the numbers when we're looking at calculations. If we're struggling in the food world, then yes, we can use contractors. That's not universally supported by the food team because actually they take a great deal of pride in the work they do and would rather have the consistency when they're carrying out a food team an inspection. So when I kind of say actually we're falling behind and do we need to consider some external resource when we have the funds, their immediate response will be, let us see what we can do, let us change our working hours for a temporary period of time. If you're part-time, they may increase to try and cover off that outstanding inspection load.
Sorry, can I continue? I've got a few other bits. On the back of that, I was thinking, can we do apprenticeships in this work, or are we not qualified to train people within the council?
They need to do there's a degree route to work in environmental health. And once they graduate, there is then a kind of 2-year work programme that they need to complete to be fully qualified. So yes, we can, at that point, we can absolutely support them. We can support them earlier on, but and some part-time courses are available. So occasionally we do get people come to us saying, can you support me through it in terms of on-the-job work, not funding, while I'm qualifying, and we do our best to try and support it because we absolutely want people as they're coming into the profession.
But we can't fund anyone training. What you're saying?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm trying to remember, and sorry, I can't remember, but I think the first reason this was asked to come to the committee was because it was showing an overspend, and I can't remember why it was showing an overspend, if somebody could remind me of that. And then just finally, curiously, where do all the abandoned vehicles end up? What do you do with them? Where do they go?
The abandoned vehicles are picked up by our contractor, so they will crush them or sell them on our behalf, depending on the price of scrap metal at that particular time and the market for second-hand used cars. The overspend that was showing earlier on last year in this financial year was around the public health funerals, and how we kind of project that, and also the stray dog kenneling contract and how we project that. So that it does go up and down, and we need to be careful about the fluctuations that are shown in those areas. But yeah, it depends on what's coming in terms of what we're actually spending in that service.
Okay, thanks. Marcus Cravis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got PTSD from thinking about my dogs behaved when they were younger. And yeah, I had a tag much like Councillor Hazel said. It was looking at, again, it gets back to that level of service, I suppose, and we talk about the restructure, we talk about, obviously, you know, from a licensing point of view, you know, we've lost, I don't want to say lost licensing officers, but licensing officers with considerable experience have gone in specific fields. Are we confident that we can pick up some of that knowledge? It's one of those things that happens, I suppose, in a lot of councils, is that knowledge gets lost. And especially as we now live in, hopefully now we live in a paperless society, that knowledge isn't lost and the background's still somewhere on a hard drive. Are we confident that we've got the resources to actually deal with the big licensing issues that we have in Somerset? Obviously, I think it's been mentioned once when we talked about the Glastonbury wash-up. And are we happy that's all in place? And I suppose the other thing I should declare an interest here, someone who's waiting for food hygiene inspection after 28 days. Not that anyone's particularly concerned about waiting after 28 days, but I think you said about businesses not being opening until they've had that initial, I think it was, or was it the initial contact? But of course, those delays, and it gets the same again, even with other parts of the council, if there's a business that's acting quickly or wants to get open or do something quickly, whether it be licensing, whether it be planning, there's a financial cost for any delay. It could be a potential financial loss. So, and we don't want a load of complaints over it, but I just wondered how focused, and I think you were focused when you gave your presentation, and I agree with what Dawn said, what an awful lot you do. And ironically, it's probably the food safety in the doors of the schools that people instantly, that's probably the thing. If you said to somebody, what does environmental health do? They'll say, oh, they put those stickers on the doors of food. They forget about all the other stuff you do, which is a real shame, really. But it is those public facing ones that they maybe interact with. So that was those two. I think there's two questions there. The other one was on, and as I said, is sound and with regard to consultations on planning and even licensing, and who makes a decision? And apologies if not. Who makes a decision on whether a consultation is put in or not? Is there a specific criteria? For instance, on I think on the licensing panels I've sat on, I think I've only ever seen a EHO officer once, I think. And then from a planning point of view, I've only ever had, apart from my own many years ago, I've only ever seen one case where someone's actually had an EHO officer come along and make a comment on their planning. So I wondered if there's a criteria of when EHO consults, or is it just a case of, are we struggling with resource again and we're not maybe consulting as we should be?
Okay. Yep. Thanks for that. Oh, I think I was echoing then. Licensing. So I'll start with licensing. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to sit here and say, yeah, I'm really happy with the level of cover we've got in licensing. I guess if I had as much money as I possibly wanted, I'd resource all the teams up. If I'm completely honest, we are asking a lot of our teams, and we are absolutely at the point now where there's no give in the system, I would say. So there's always a caution around, yes, it's okay to carry on with the structures, we've got it, but we have to be aware of what we've got. We have lost over the last, since vesting day, certainly, a considerable amount of knowledge and experience across the teams. I would hate to add up the amount of years we've lost, and it is frightening if you do that. In terms of specifically around the licensing and Glastonbury Festival, we have fortunately had a couple of years to make sure the staff are as ready as they can be in terms of picking up that large licensing event, and alongside the fact that licensing is a very process-driven world. One size has to fit all. So in terms, you have to upscale for Glastonbury, but in fact the rules of licensing are the same. So that does help and aid with that. Certainly the managers that will be managers in environmental health as we go forward need time and support, most importantly from all of us within that regulation operations world, to say, actually, let's have a go at this, let's try it this way, because none of them have managed teams this size. None of them have worked with the programs that we've got in these areas at the size that they are now, and they need support. There is no one that's going to sit there in environmental health and go, yeah, I've done this before. It's new for all of us, so we have to just make sure we're trying to get the support in where we can. Food inspection delay, I would be really disappointed if businesses are not opening because we haven't got to them yet. So that's something I will pick up and make sure we're focusing on as part of the new business inspection checks, because that is absolutely critical. You don't officially need a piece of paper from environmental health to open, but we just need to make sure businesses are aware of that. And in terms of planning consultations, I probably need more information from the experts on that, but certainly in terms of noise, we are a statutory consultee, so we may not go to committees, but our comments will have been added to the planning applications and fed back through to planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wes Reed, please, followed by Sarah Wakefield. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting. Just going back to the abandoned vehicles and complaints, for example, which is obviously a staggering figure. How many vehicles, we're interested to know really, how many vehicles roughly we're dealing with and what the cost of this council every year? That's the first question. And secondly, is there a particular sort of following pattern you can see? I mean, I take it obviously vehicles are generally dumped in back lanes, laybys, where they can't be seen really. But I mean, is there a following pattern in the county you can see that where we need to maybe keep an eye on a specific area more so, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got the numbers or the figures for you, but I can get that and get that sent to you. Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, if we come to repeat offenders, it's the people that see vehicles parked on their road because people are leaving them there to go to the airport, go to the train station, neighbourly disputes. So there's a lot of that kind of that goes on that we have to try and deal with through our usual complaint routes that we have in environmental health, which is actually just explain what can and can't be done about these vehicles to try and stop the complaints continually coming back through to us. Can't think of the last part of your question then. Oh, well, yeah, we haven't done that work. It's something that we need to do, and we did it for the unauthorised encampment work we have, and last year, and it was really interesting. And we have asked that mapping work is done for abandoned vehicles as well to try and pick up if there is any patterns in areas. The teams dealing with abandoned vehicles are mainly ex-district teams. And since Somerset has been created and we've obviously become one, we pick up the abandoned vehicles for the areas that the county staff would have picked up before. So it's a learning process for us to understand where those new hotspot areas are, hence why we've asked for the mapping to be picked up. So yeah, it's an area of work we haven't got to the bottom of yet, but we need to.
Right, Andy Kendall, please.
Yeah, very quick. Thank you, Chair. It's only very quick. I think you have answered these questions, which I'm going to ask, but I'm going to just put a little bit of thing in. The abandoned vehicles, if a vehicle's on the road, no tax, no MOT, no insurance, but you can identify the owner. Now, what do you do? Because as far as I can, by the way I'm going, we have a van that's been going around for years. It moves, but the police say, unless it's moving, we can't stop it. If I'm reporting it to you, it's got an owner. However, illegally, it's on the road. That's a very easy one. But moving on to the other one is to back up Marcus on this. I'm a little bit confused about the state of public house on hygiene inspections. You mentioned the 28 days you will do. However, you did actually say just then to Marcus that if it goes over, they can still open. But do we have a duty to be there within 28 days? And if we do, and we haven't got enough staff, is that being looked into?
Yeah, so I'll start with the food one. The duty is on the food business operator to register 28 days before they open. What tends to happen is they ring us and they either register because they are so worried about that 28 days that they want to register and then it's too early to register, or they ring us on a Friday and say, oh, we're going to open tomorrow, but we haven't registered. Is this going to be a problem? And we say, no, it's okay, don't worry about it. So we're all working towards this we're all working within this 28 days. The duty is on them, not on us. Best practice for us as a local authority is to make sure we've had contact with them before they open, to offer them or to make sure they're aware of the legal implications of when they open and what they need to do. So when they register, every food business, I'm going to look down the line and hopefully everyone's had it, and every food business will receive an email from us to say, thanks for your registration form. Please make sure before you open, you comply with these requirements and you go here and you look at this and you look at that. That replaces the old version of life, which used to be I'd pick up the food business operator, I'd ring them and pick up the phone and say, how are you getting on? What have you got left to do? Do you need any advice? So they've had that from us. So we have managed that expectation of that 28-day pre-opening period, and it also allows them to have a contact to get back in touch with us as an environmental health team to say, actually, I do want some more help, or do you know what, I've got 10 businesses already, I know what I'm doing, I'll open, see you when you're ready to get here. So it depends on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Chair. Just about to come back on that. So if someone's complying, I'm going to open a shop in 28 days. If I comply today and 28 days, generally it will be done. There's no problems. Because I know where my part of Somerset, when people talk about this, just see if they've got food hygiene certificate and all this, and make sure this, but generally they seem to be all 5-star restaurants now, but
They're not.
maybe not, but this is what this. Okay, we'll cut it there. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, the second question. So if the vehicle doesn't have any tax or MOT, but there appears to be an owner, then that is an issue for the DVLA, not for us. It would not be classed as abandoned for us.
Agree, and they say inform the police. The police say they can't do nothing unless the vehicle's moving on the road.
I think it would still go, we would be notifying the DVLA. Certainly for us, when we've done our checks, we can't do any further work if we're showing that there is an owner for the vehicle, or if we've been informed there's an owner for the vehicle, because if we then took it off the road, that would be a problem.
It's a grey area.
It's always my understanding if it was on the highway, it needs to be taxed. But anyway, Chris?
Yeah, so it's not a grey area. It's either an abandoned vehicle that falls under our legislation, it's either an uninsured vehicle that the police can stop because it's in transit, or it's an untaxed vehicle and it goes to the DVLA. And in the chat, I've put the link to report an untaxed vehicle to the DVLA. So there is no grey area.
Yeah, Hazel, briefly.
Thank you. And the DVLA come out and they clamp vehicles. They do it. I've had several in my patch where they clamp them. So, you know, if you report it as untaxed and where it is, they will come and clamp, much to the irritation or joy of residents, depending on which side they're coming from. Yes.
Okay, thanks. I've got Sarah Wakefield who wants to speak. I've got one or two questions, then we need to move on. Sarah Wakefield, please.
I just wanted to just intervene when you were talking about van dwellers on the roads, particularly in Glastonbury. I just wanted to say that we are, in the housing and homelessness team, we're really aware of it. I think I should make it clear, and I hope I've got this right, that if you are living in a van parked on a road, you're not strictly speaking counted as homeless, because you're making a go of it in some sort of way. We know that there are loads of people living that way in Glastonbury. There are others I've seen in Frome and other places in the county. We are aware of it. We will be coming up with a way of trying to approach and deal with it, but you have to accept that some of these people are complex cases. They've come from different places, as with that couple who moved to Glastonbury after they found that terrible child buried in the garden. But just to say that it is an issue in the Glastonbury area, particularly, that we are aware of, and we are trying to do something about it. So just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Susanna?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's a whole, as far as I'm concerned, that is a whole separate issue from the one of abandoned vehicles, because whilst in some ways they may appear to the passerby to be the same thing, there is a huge number of them that are empty. I would say of the, and sadly, we've got about 400 in Glastonbury, at least. I would say, I guess over half of them actually have no one in them. So, you know, I know it's complicated, but the questions that I was putting to Sarah were around abandoned, as opposed to the people that you're talking about, who I know are a problem. It's difficult, it's complex, and, you know, whilst we might find it irritating, at the same time, we all know these are people who need our help and support. So I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about abandoned vehicles, which is what I thought the discussion was. Thank you anyway, Sarah.
Thank you. Hazel, you wanted to come back very
Yes,
briefly?
I do. It's just on the definition of homelessness, and I thought you were homeless if you have nowhere to park the structure in which you live. If you have nowhere legal to park the structure, I think that is a definition of homelessness. That's what it used to be when that was under my remit.
I think we're in danger of disappearing down a
We are in
wormhole here if
danger
we're
of
not careful.
disappearing down a rabbit hole, but you know, 20 odd years ago, that was the definition.
Okay.
I'll leave it with Sarah to follow that up.
Yeah, clearly there are various issues in Glastonbury that will need to be addressed, and thank you for raising them in the meeting, and I'm sure the relevant people take them on board and there'll be a solution coming forward. Thank you. Right, before we wind up, I've just got a couple of very brief questions, if I may, of my own. The first one is, I'm assuming that the environment we will retain 4 environmental health teams based on the legacy areas in the old offices. Is that right? Rather than have a central team in Taunton or Bridgewater or somewhere else?
The team will be managed across Somerset, but staff where they're being obviously they're on their existing terms and conditions will work out of the offices they've traditionally worked out of.
Are they remote working by and large, or office
Hybrid.
space?
Hybrid.
Okay, thank you. Is it at all possible to potentially delegate some of the responsibilities around abandoned vehicles to town or parish councils?
Pass. Need to look into that. I would think the answer would be no from the town and parishes, and I think we have looked at it in one area, but I can look at it again.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, it just occurs to me, even if it's just slapping the notice on the vehicle, whether that could be done. And my final question is, who deals with the burning of trade waste on private land? Is that an environmental health issue? It is.
Yes,
Okay.
it is, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Sarah, for a very informative presentation, and thank you everybody for your comments and questions. I think this is something we may well return to again. It seems to have everybody fired up, as it were. Right. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the complaints policy and annual customer feedback report. We have 2 public speakers for this, and firstly I'll welcome Mr. David Orr to kick us off. Okay, Mr. Orr, you have 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, before I start, Chair, I need to update you. I received, on this particular complaint, I received a stage 1 refusal at 4:10 late yesterday afternoon. It unfortunately didn't address many of the issues I've raised. So I've taken the stage 2 and I'd like to read an amended statement, if that's okay.
Okay, under the circumstances, yep.
A formal complaint should be a last resort, only necessary when service access channels have failed. If I have an issue with the council which I'm unable to resolve with the officers, then I escalate it to my division councillors. If they can't resolve it, then to the relevant executive councillor. I feel that's a reasonable approach. Taunton has a planning feature called a green wedge, which allows green spaces running into town to act as a green lung, support nature, etc. In Taunton South, a controversial planning application allowed 315 houses to be built within the Vivarium Wedge, which set a precedent and degraded this valued green feature. The application was held in a sports centre as 400 people came to protest at the meeting. A new Killams Primary School was needed and promised, and that promise helped a narrow 8-6 vote in favour of the controversial application. In 2024, on the land for the new Killams Primary School, an application for a care home was suddenly made. Education had already in January 2023 taken a Section 106 contribution in lieu of the land set aside for a new Killams Primary School towards a shortfall for a large primary school far away across town at the new Orchard Grove development, beyond the travel area for this area. The councillors of the community hadn't been consulted beforehand. This key decision was taken in an infrastructure group meeting on a verbal briefing without any published papers. If this occurred in your division, would you be happy? The unexpected care home planning application in May 2024 had no papers from education as to where the children would now go to school. Division councillors were unable to get answers, so I escalated this to the chair of the Planning Committee West. He asked for a further 3 weeks on the planning portal for public consultation and the education paper to be made available. The planning portal never displayed the extended date, so people didn't know they had time to submit, and the very late education paper contained no information on whether children would now go to school. These are statutory process failures. I escalated this executive councillor Wyke. When I heard nothing back, I sent a polite follow-up. That is now being deemed unreasonable behaviour on my part. This is an unresolved complaint since the 6th of September last year. My complaint has been stuck at stage 1 for over 4 months without any communication as to the delay. Escalation to the customer services manager yielded no response. How many customers' complaints languish unaddressed like mine? Are these reported to you? Can customer services be ignored by frontline services without sanction? Given this council's 90% fail rate when people go to the Ombudsman, if I take this failure of the complaint system to the Ombudsman, I believe the council will be publicly admonished. Is anyone held to account? Are service failings addressed with oversight? If the council appears to be officer-led and your elected councillors cannot resolve issues for you, why bother raising a formal complaint? I feel pretty disillusioned, to be honest. If constituents become disillusioned with this council's service failings, will they give up complaining to try and get rectification improvement? And how would you know how many people had done that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. We have a response, I think, from Rebecca Martin. I think, Federica, I'll come to you in a moment if I may, Federica. I think, I beg your pardon, Federica, just give me a moment. Yeah, your statement has changed slightly. Response has been prepared, which I think Federica is now going to read out to you, which I think will deal with the issues. As far as this particular committee is concerned, of course, the nub of the issue is how your complaint has been dealt with, and going forward, as you know, on this agenda, we will be discussing the complaints policy and looking at the feedback reports, which is partially referenced already. So we'll come to that in a moment. This is, as I say, not the place to resolve complaints, but the committee is very, very interested to hear in the experiences of members of the public in relation to how the council conducts its business. So we've taken account of what you say. We will listen to Councillor Smith-Roberts in a moment. We will have a debate which may come back to the points you raised, but I would prefer just to focus on the complaints policy and the annual feedback rather than yours specifically. So I hope that's okay with you. Federica Smith-Roberts, please.
Thank you, Chair. So again, like yourself, I'm not going to comment on the subject of the complaint because that will be dealt with outside of this. Firstly, Mr. Orr, my apologies that it has taken some time for you to receive the stage 1 answer, and I know and appreciate that you are escalating it to stage 2. We do know, as you can see in the report, that I believe 86% of complaints that were brought into us over that reporting period have been dealt with, and that our average answer time is around approximately 22 days for stage 1. I am going to pick this up separately with the lead member involved, because whilst I oversee complaints and its policy from a customer service point of view, actually it's down to each individual service area to answer those complaints, and we do know that we have tried to get that response. However, that particular department, as we all know, is under a lot of pressure with the workloads that it's got in. We do know that they are looking for additional support, but I will look to follow that up for you, Mr. Orr, and see what further information I can gather. But I'm sorry that it took so long for that response to come to you.
Okay, thank you, Federica. I'll add too that, I mean, please feel free to contact me as chair of the Scrutiny Committee if you feel the need to in future. I think I ought to, just for the sake of clarity, and I suspect Councillor Coles as well, declare that I have a feeling I sat on the planning committee that talked about the original planning application way back, must have been 10 years ago or more, and 2013. Well, I was on the Taunton Dean Planning Committee in those days, so I may well have been there that night. And I suspect that Councillor Coles was there, and of course Councillor Coles is currently the chair of Planning Committee West, who asked for the extension of time. So just no, you won't, but you are currently when the extension was requested. So just to make sure that everybody's clear about where we all stand within this. Right, Mrs. Orr, would you like to come and present your question? 3 minutes when you press the button.
Can I just say that I've shortened it a bit because I think it would have run over the time.
Splendid, thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Brenda Orr. I'm a retired secondary teacher with 40 years experience. I bring my educational values as a teacher here today. I am asking for a governance review to address deficiencies in the current unreasonable customer policy, a review of when and how unreasonable and vexatious allegations can be made, a review of when and how citizens can be named to councillors and/or staff. The unreasonable customer policy is applied by officers without any democratic oversight or approval. That is poor governance. Should the executive councillor for the relevant portfolio approve any unreasonable customer designations before they are unilaterally applied by a senior officer to a named individual? The unreasonable customer policy allows a senior officer to act as judge, jury, and appeals court. It is potentially open to abuses of power or prejudicial actions against an individual. Employees, when accused of misconduct, have the right of appeal to a panel of elected councillors. Why are citizens accused of misconduct not afforded the same rights? Without democratic oversight, an officer-only application of unreasonable customer is potentially open to abuse. If there are service failures or maladministration, could the unreasonable customer policy be misused to deter the engaged citizen? Should the unreasonable customer policy require an executive councillor's approval before the individual is named and identified to all councillors and/or to staff? Should the individual alleged to be an unreasonable customer have the right to see both the evidence against them and what has been written about their alleged behaviours to councillors and/or to staff? When unreasonable or vexatious allegations are made but kept hidden from the alleged unreasonable customer, what redress do they have to restore their good name without the need for referral to the Ombudsman? If the claims of unreasonable or vexatious behaviours were erroneously made, would the redress correction go to everyone previously informed? I ask for your assurances today that the democratic and natural justice deficiencies in the current unreasonable customer policy will be fully addressed without further delay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I mean, you did well to actually find the unreasonable behaviour, because in the report we're looking at this today, the draft complaints policy, if you follow the link, it takes you to a page, and actually the unreasonable policy is tucked away in the download section, which is not immediately apparent. So one of the things I will be asking that can be corrected, so at least people can see what our policies are in a clear way. So I was quite disappointed about that. But anyway, Federica, are you to respond to Mrs. Orr?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll give a brief overview and then I'll bring in Rebecca just to explain to both the resident and members of the committee just how the current policy works. So I just want to clarify something in relation to the terminology used in the question. I want to say that the terminology used was unreasonable customer. However, it is actually defined in our policies about unreasonable customers' behaviour. So it is around the behaviour rather than the policy focusing on the behaviour of the customer over time or during an incident and the impact that it's having on services and staff. We do not, under the policy, designate a customer as unreasonable or vexatious. It is the behaviour that is being referenced within that policy. We do want to bring that policy back for review, and that will be later on in the spring or into after April, into the new year, and we will be bringing that forward, and hopefully this committee can play its part in making sure that they are happy with how the policy works across the council. I think it's also very much a point to say that if a customer's behaviour is demonstrated as or said to be unreasonable, we're not stopping how they can interact with the council. We give them a clearly defined route as to how they can interact, so they aren't being silenced if this policy is put in place. There is just a mechanism and a route for them to follow. I'm going to hand over to Rebecca so she can explain the different ways and how it happens in relation to the policy being implemented.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a few points from the statement just to give some clarification. So firstly, with regard to the deficiencies around the decision making, it's not a decision made by one person. So the process is that a request is firstly made in writing by a manager within a service who is experiencing some behaviour that they find unmanageable in various ways. So it covers a range of behaviours. That request asks that manager within the service to explain what behaviour they're finding challenging, what impact it's having on the service or individual members of staff, depending on what the nature of the behaviour is. Any potential, what they want to do about it. So what measures they want to put in place to try and change that way of working with the customer. And also any known issues that any measures we might put in place might have on an individual. So are there known disabilities or impacts that might affect the way the customer is able to communicate with us as a council? So there's a request made from a manager within the service as a starting point. That request comes to me as head of service in terms of customer experience. And I will then review that request and I will have a discussion with that manager about it to either seek any clarification, to perhaps make some suggestions if it's possible. I think that sometimes actually we could do these things before we use the policy. to change the way we interact with this customer, or to agree some next steps if we feel that there are need to put some measures in place. So the process is that the decision will be made by 2 officers, both at manager level, rather than one person making a decision to start with. There is also a right of appeal, which is then considered by a third officer at a more senior level. So there is steps there to make sure that actually, you know, the suggestion that it could be used in terms of, you know, a particular sort of vendetta or against a customer, the steps, checks and balances there to make sure that's not happening. The process in terms of whether it's appropriate to have each signed off by executive or by a member to have that democratic oversight, whilst I wouldn't mind that in any way, shape or form, that the concern has been before that the process needs to be really quick and reactive. In many cases, we need to be really swift about how we use this policy. And partly that's because it does cover the wide range of behaviours that we see. So in an example that we've had quite recently, there was incredibly aggressive and potentially violent behaviour in one of our buildings towards staff and other customers using that building. We need to be very quick with that customer in terms of saying, actually, we don't welcome you in our buildings for a period of time because of the way you behaved, or if you are going to return to our building, these are the rules around that. We've got to do that instantly because they may, of course, present the next day. So there needs to be that swift reactive bit. Similarly, we've had incidents, for example, of racial abuse towards some of our staff. And again, we need to be really quick on that because we have that duty of care to staff, that we need to make sure that, firstly, the staff gets the message really quickly and clear and close to the incident, that we will not tolerate that. You know, and it's something, a line in the sand, we will not tolerate that. We need to demonstrate that to the staff so that they feel supported. We also need to do it really quickly to make sure that that member of staff is protected from similar incidents. We need to do that. So it's just a feeling that actually, you know, to put that democratic oversight in it may make the process sort of unworkably lengthy. But that is obviously a discussion for members to have when it comes back for review. In terms of, and I think Councillor Smith-Roberts picked up on this, in terms of some of the language used in the statement, we don't designate a customer as unreasonable or vexatious. It is around the customer's behaviour at a given point in time. So even in the most extreme incidences of behaviour where we do get violence and aggression towards staff, we do appreciate that that's not a measure or a judgment on the customer. It is sometimes a result of the experience the customer is currently having. So it may be, you know, we often get that. Sorry?
Suzanne, we can't hear.
Sorry, I shouldn't have butted in.
No, please.
But I did say stone walling in many cases.
Sorry,
Rebecca, please continue.
I don't follow.
Sorry, please.
Sorry.
Would you like me to explain what I mean by stone walling?
Well, can you do it in the debate then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Sorry, so where was I? Around the, yes, so it's not designating a customer as unreasonable, it's recognising that at times customers behave in ways that at other times they may not do, because of pressures they're under and experiences that they're having. So it's around looking at the behaviour at a period of time and what impact that's having on delivering services or staff well-being. So it's not about making a judgment on somebody's character or nature at all. The statement around the employee rights and the difference that's afforded, in terms of comparison, we can't really make that because employee rights are obviously enshrined in law, and the impacts of those sorts of processes on employees are significantly different than the impacts here. As Councillor Smith-Roberts touched on, what we do not do under this policy is prevent any customer from accessing services that they're entitled to access, nor do we prevent them from following sort of democratic or legal rights. It's simply around how we manage our interactions with those customers to ensure that the service can run efficiently and that staff are protected from any behaviours which may be detrimental. And in terms of silence, and I think Councillor Roberts covered that. In terms of silencing a customer, you know, it's not intended to do that. We always make very clear that a customer retains their rights to engage with their local officials and elected members, and that they have a route into the council. In every case, there is some route into the council, so that we can manage their rights to services, we can manage their request for information and all of the above. The policy is being reviewed, as we say, so we are looking to sign that off in the first quarter of 25-26. It was due to be slightly earlier because we tend to do it annually, but there is a new piece of work that Health and Safety are working on around cautionary contacts, which is for staff, typically staff that visit or have meetings with members of the public, and where there are known risks for them. So it may be that actually somebody that staff may need to visit has previously been violent, or that there's a dangerous dog on the property, etc. So there is around a register that we can, Health and Safety are looking at, to make sure that staff are aware of potential risks when they're going out to visit. And obviously we need some policy around that to make sure that the register is held in a fair manner, that it's reviewed properly, that GDPR is respected. And so what we are aiming to do is incorporate the policy requirements for that in with the unreasonable customer behaviour policy, rather than having a whole separate new policy. So that's the delay on that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Orr for their questions. Thank you to Rebecca and Federica for their answers. I do not propose to take any more discussion on that particular topic. I think we now need to focus back on what the committee agenda item is, which is looking at the complaints policy and the annual customer feedback report. Becca, are you happy to introduce the report? Your mic, can you put your mic on?
Yes, sorry. I will share my screen with the meeting, if it will work.
Whilst you're doing that, I think the Federica mentioned that the vexatious or difficult customers policy will be reviewed and coming before this committee at some point, which we'll look forward to, as I think it clearly merits some further discussion.
Yes, so there's two items coming to the committee today. One is to look at the annual feedback report for 23-24, and the other is for scrutiny of the revised customer feedback policy. So the overview of the feedback is to look at it's the first year of unitary operation, so we want to look at that and some implications around that, some areas of interest and focus, and then also I want to talk a little bit about the driver for change in the policy and overview of changes made. So the annual review, and I hope you can sort of see this better than I can, actually, it's very small on my screen. This shows, how many complaints that we received for the council, which is 4,020 during the year. A large proportion of those, as you'll see from that, were actually rejected or withdrawn. And we've done some work to understand why that might be. And some of that, I believe, is because what we consider a complaint within the council isn't always understood necessarily by the public. So the public, for example, might think that they want to complain about a pothole, but if we don't know about that, that's a request for service in the first instance. And similarly with things like Sarah was just talking about, with things like abandoned vehicles. I want to complain that there's an abandoned vehicle at the end of my street. Obviously isn't a complaint. So what we've done around that is worked with the web team to refine somewhat the way that customers can put their feedback online. The vast majority of complaints we get are received via self-service online. And so we've refined that a little bit, hopefully to reduce that number of rejected and withdrawn, because we want them to get to the right place first time. Providing comparisons between the former 5 councils and the single unitary is quite difficult because not all of the district councils and the old county council were logging complaints in the same way and had the same sort of comparable information that we could do. But we have tried to do that where we can. But looking at the numbers alone, there is an estimated sort of 30% increase in overall complaints. And I will explain a little bit more around why I think some of that is later on. Of the accepted complaints, there was a sort of a split with about 1,569 relate to the former Somerset County Council services and 1,145 to the former district services. And there's a little explanation there of the figures of accepted complaints for the previous years. In terms of what people are complaining about in the broad directorate sense, there's a breakdown there which shows climate and place, and there's no surprises here really, because they are consistent with what we would have expected from previous complaint data that we held. Climate and place, there's a lot of housing complaints and the like in there. Community services, sorry, that's the community services. Climate and place is more around the highway stuff and the planning. And then the children and family stuff, which I'll also come on to in a second. The majority of feedback, so our overview of the resolution, the majority of complaints are resolved at stage 1 of the process. So 77% are resolved at stage 1, and a further 9% were still open at stage 1 at the end of that year, the more recent complaints. 53% of the cases were upheld or partially upheld, 38 not upheld, and 9 were resolved upon receipt. And 22 days was the average working, was the closure date for stage 1, which is in excess of the target of 10 working days. And we are looking to try and work with services to improve that where we can. Only 4% of the cases did escalate to the local government and social care ombudsman. The Ombudsman report shows they investigated 31 Somerset Council cases and upheld 28, which is a 90% uphold rate. And there are some reasons why that is so high as well, which I can explain. The Somerset Council report includes details of a higher number of decisions. So in my report, the numbers going to the Ombudsman look higher than 31, and that's because the Ombudsman can take quite a long time to resolve cases. So some of the cases that they're reporting on in year, we would have received a long time before, but we want to make sure that they're included in the report so that we're very transparent about all the outcomes of those cases, and the numbers are not huge still. As a council, we paid £136,944 in remedy payments following Ombudsman adjudication on cases. This slide that I have here shows the biggest areas, the top 10, if you like, for complaints. And as I said earlier, there's no real surprises here. Send, Rebs and Bens, housing, the areas that you might expect. The Send complaint really does, the high number there represents a national picture, and it is an area that my team are focusing on with Claire Winter and Amelia Walker to try and look at what we can do something about locally, because whilst there are some really big problems nationally within Send, there are also things that we can definitely improve locally around how we communicate with Send parents and some other bits and pieces. What we're also doing to address that Send issue and the high number of complaints and the money I just spoke about, the remedy, the vast majority of that, as you'll see in a minute, relates to Send cases. So what we've done is that we have had an initial meeting with more planned with the Deputy Ombudsman to talk about the number of cases we have, the issues that we've got and how we're dealing with them, because what the Ombudsman was tending to do on each case was saying, right, we've found some faults, you need to pay this money to make sure provision is caught up, which is fair enough, but then asking us for each case to identify what we're specifically doing to address the problems that have led to the complaint. And because some of the problems are more systemic and they're national problems, what we've done is to create, or what Send have done is to create a big improvement plan. So there's lots of things that need to improve. There's lots of things, as I say, locally, lots of things that we need to work with the marketplace around for Send. And that improvement plan we've now shared with the Ombudsman, and we've shown them how the actions in that plan link to some of the fault that they're finding specifically. So one of the examples of that is quite often one of the faults will be delay in issuing an EHCP. So that looks as if it's a local problem. We can just fix that because you're just doing it too slowly, so do it more quickly. But it isn't as simple as that, insofar as quite often the delay is driven by not being able to name a suitable place for the child in a provision that can meet their needs. So it's not that we can't issue it, it's that we've not got the information to be able to put in because there's that problem nationally. So we've worked with the Ombudsman to explain that, and the Ombudsman have agreed to take a much more holistic approach in how they deal with that improvement journey with us. So yes, they will still recommend remedy where we need to put something in place for a child immediately if we can, or where we need to compensate for lost provision. But in terms of that improvement journey, rather than trying to get us to demonstrate improvement for every single complaint, we're going to look more holistically to the overall plan, and the Ombudsman are going to help us monitor that, and also help have our voice heard on that national forum about the national issues. So that's quite a positive move forward in terms of the way we're working with the regulator on that. This slide does show the sort of registered causes for complaints. The timeliness, as I say, that's quite frequent within SEND for the reasons I just described. Similarly, failure to deliver a service can be that, because actually we can't put, speech and language therapy in because we've got nobody that can deliver it. Those sorts of issues are quite commonplace. In terms of the commentary, so that's just what I've been describing about the SEND work. So we're doing that holistic work with the Ombudsman, with SEND, and looking to sort of improve where we can locally, as well as that national picture. We're putting some work in place on iCase. iCase is the system we use to log and monitor our complaints, to improve the granularity of reporting that we can get. So coming together as one big council has been quite a challenge to be able to sort of build in district functions into the existing system. We've done it quite well so that we can report to the level that you're seeing here, but we want much more granular detail, which is possible in our system, but we need to sort of build that, having that year's knowledge of what people are complaining about. We can now make sure that we can build that in, so it's much easier to pull out information in the future. I talked about the increase in numbers in complaints, and we think part of that is due to the better recording. So as a unitary, we have one way of recording complaints, all logged on one system that is very reportable, which wasn't the case across the 5 councils in the past. We also have the ability for all customers to self-serve in terms of their complaints now. So customers can go online, click a button, and they can complain through that route, and most do it that way. And I think that improves the flow of complaints to us as a council. Projections in terms of the year we're coming to the end of now, it looks like we will have another increase in complaints of around 10% over the year. And we are starting work as the new structures come out from the 4th of February onwards. We're going to start to work with the new teams as they emerge in the council to monitor, to identify what reporting and monitoring needs they have to try and improve that response rate. Because that's one of the challenges at the moment is the structure is still a little unknown, and we're still not properly working as one council in some areas. But having that new structure in place and starting to sort of fill those operational posts will really help us be able to work with the right people to ensure we're able to chase things through a little bit quicker, I think. So that was I don't know whether you want me to go on to the second item or whether you want to deal with the report.
Well, I think,
first.
thank you for taking us through the complaints report. The second item is, of course, about the
policy,
the revision of the complaints policy, which I think, from reading the papers, is just a reflection of some new requirements from government. Otherwise, it's pretty much as it was. So I think if anybody wants to drill into what those changes are that have been required by government, then we'll do that. But I'm quite happy to thank you for your presentation, and we'll start the debate if that's okay. Okay. Councillor Hobhouse, please, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I have a major problem with this policy. For those of you who have sat on Climate and Place Scrutiny Committee, you will know the reason why. Mr. Orr has just been not allowed to bring forward. He's been complaining for 3.5 years about the policy that's gone through Climate and Place on the nutrient neutrality. He has not received proper answers from anybody. He has been put in a position where officers have attempted to warn me off. I have complained to the monitoring officer. I have had my complaint upheld. I don't know what form of discipline has taken place, but I do know that we have a major problem with the behaviour of some of the officers with reference to Mr. Orr's complaints, a lot of which were justified, some of which aren't, but he has no more chance of being violent than the man in the moon. And the problem we have is he is an ex-employee of this council. He knows the rules backwards, and therefore he can manipulate the system to his own benefit. And I find it unbelievable that we make this man a complainant when all he's doing is trying to get answers to questions which people are not trying to answer. And I really feel, Mr. Chairman, that we need to put a proposal for the executive that we have some form of democratic control over this policy to go out of this committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Clearly, we don't want to go into individual complaints, and I mean, what we're looking at here is how the council has a system for receiving complaints and how it operates that system fairly for everybody to get some good outcomes. So I hear what you say, and I think we'll come back to your point towards the end of the debate, if that's okay.
Can I just come back in, Mr. Chairman? One of the things that we've been asked to do today is to put forward any changes we want to go to the executive. And that's what I am proposing that we actually do at the end of this item. Thank you.
Quite happy to come back to you then. Right, I've got Dawn Johnson, Susanna Hart, and then Marcus Cravis, please.
Hi, thank you for this very detailed report. It's really interesting to see the types of complaints and fully understand, some of the issues that are really foremost with our residents. I think it's really, really helpful for us as councillors to see what kind of issues are really causing our residents real concerns. I do have, I mean, we're not supposed to be dealing with one case, but I do have concerns equally about people being labelled when they are just trying to get answers. As a challenging person myself, people often don't want to respond to me and go into a silent ether when I am challenging. And I think it is something this council does need to visit as to how prepared they are to answer challenging questions. And so I'm just going to put that there from my own personal experience as a councillor, not necessarily getting responses when people don't want to have to answer your questions. There's one very tiny detail which I've spotted, which I do need to let you know about on page 62, where it says for the 67 stage 1, I think children's services should read adults services. It's actually gone on to adults at that point. Page 62 at the very bottom, it says for the 67 stage 1 children's services complaints, but you're actually on adult services at that point. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, 22 days does seem a long time to be an average response when sometimes it could be urgent. So I'm slightly concerned about that. The SEND thing, I'm really, really concerned about SEND, and I understand the conversations that are taking place with the Ombudsman. It just seems like the service is completely and utterly overwhelmed, and I really have concerns for the families that impacts on. As a parent with 2 children with the EHCPs. But I had to get them privately because I couldn't get them within the system. It's the impact that has on families, and I don't want those families ever to be labelled as troublemakers, because actually they are trying to do the best for their children. And I sometimes think that gets a bit lost in some of the ways it's talked about. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Rebecca, did you want to respond?
Yeah, just to pick up some of those points. Firstly, in terms of the policy today that we are looking to have recommendations for exec, that isn't the unreasonable customer behaviour policy, just to be clear, that bit's coming later. So in terms of any recommendations about whether there should be democratic oversight would be when that one comes back rather than this one, because this doesn't cover it. in terms, I absolutely understand what you're saying, and with special education needs parents, that there often is quite difficult relationships in those complaints. But that was what I was saying earlier about, it's not about labeling somebody as difficult. It's about understanding that that person's going through a really difficult time, that they're trying to get the right provision for their child. We're trying to help that with all SEND colleagues, are trying to help that, but quite often it's a really hard process because of all the things I mentioned earlier. I can't recall a case where we have ever used the unreasonable customer behaviour, and don't quote me on that, but I can't recall a case, certainly in recent years, where we've used that policy in regards to a SEND complaint. It's quite rarely used, the unreasonable customer behaviour policy, to a regard. And I can't recall using it on a SEND case, because we do take account of the fact that, people who are going through those difficult experiences with us, trying to get what they need and finding that very difficult, are going to behave in a slightly different way than they might in other circumstances. And we are aware of that, and we are very mindful of that. So I just wanted to provide that reassurance. It's not something we would do lightly, and we would always consider the circumstances around the behaviour as well.
Okay, Councillor Susanna Hart, please.
Thank you. I would just say that I wholeheartedly echo all the words put forward by both Councillor Hillhouse and Councillor Johnson. I could say a lot about the complaints procedure, but I won't, as this is something you say is going to be looked at, and that our recommendations can't be put forward today. They need to be put forward on a different occasion. So that's fine. I won't carry on with that. Is it possible that I think you called it an improvement plan for SEND, could that possibly be shared with us so that we could have an overview and see what direction that's going in? And just really to say that I think it is to congratulate ourselves, or even to consider that each complaint should no longer be dealt with on an individual basis, but looked at holistically, is so inappropriate. I basically haven't even got words for it. Every child, what about every child matters apart from anything else, but every child is different, every situation is different, and suggest that we shouldn't look at these complaints as an individual on an individual basis. I actually have to say I find abhorrent.
Just coming on that one, every complaint will be looked at on an individual basis. That's absolutely the case. So every complaint that we get raised by any individual will go through stage 1 of our process and stage 2 of our local process. And if it's a statutory children's complaint, there's a panel process as well for that. And they also have the legal right to go to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman will consider it as an individual complaint. The bit that they are trying to work with us holistically around is when they are looking at the remedy. So if the Ombudsman finds that we have been at fault, they will recommend individual remedies for that person. So, for example, if we've failed to give somebody speech and language therapy for 4 months and they should have had it, the Ombudsman will usually typically say, right, now you have to pay the parent so that they can engage that privately, and they will continue to do that. The bit that they're doing more holistically is saying, well, how are you going to make sure as the council that you don't keep repeating this fault? And that's the bit where they will look at the improvement plan, because some of the things there aren't quick fixes for. So some of the things, if there is an absence of certain types of school place, we can't realistically create that very quickly. So what SEND are doing is saying we've got a longer scale improvement plan to address some of those systemic issues. And that's where the Ombudsman will say, what's your long-term plan to make sure this doesn't keep happening, where there's no immediate quick fix. But they certainly will look at every complaint individually. And the other points raised, in terms of the complaints process, absolutely, that is the policy, the complaints policy that is coming today is around what the process is for lodging a complaint. The bit that I said we're not looking at today is the managing unreasonable customer behaviour policy, which will come later.
Okay, thank you for that. I see.
Can I just come back? Yeah, thank you for explaining that. Are you able to share the improvement plan with us? And, I can't not say it. I'm really sorry. We have to do better for SEND children. We have to do better. Doesn't matter. I don't want to hear anything. We have to do better. And oh, now I've got so stressed, I don't know what I'll say. What else was I going to say?
I can certainly ask Amelia Walker, who is the author of the improvement plan. I'm sure she would be happy to share that.
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I will butt in at this point if I may, because I've got some notes down here when I read through the report. And I mean, the point I was looking at was the references to the Ombudsman, which we have poor and costly outcomes, mainly on SEND, which is not good, of course. The fact that they're mostly upheld indicates our inadequacy rather than an over expectation on behalf of the complainant. And the question I was going to ask is, presumably Children's Scrutiny is on top of this and aware. I don't know. I think this is probably something more for them rather than us. I mean, this is an issue we as a Scrutiny Committee can highlight, but it needs to be pointed in the right direction to the body that can sort it. And I notice I've got Councillor Heather Shearer online who will help us out. Heather, welcome.
Thank you very much, and I've come here especially in case of this question, because I just wanted to share a couple of things with you, if I may, and thank you to Susanna and to yourself, Chair, for raising these issues. We're absolutely aware in the service about the parlous state, let's say, of our complaints record. It's nothing to be proud of. I think it's nothing to be proud of on the local government social care ombudsman results either. I'm absolutely pleased, though, that we are working proactively with the government ombudsman. Obviously, it's the right thing to do, and I think. I think Rebecca's done a splendid job in answering those questions. So from my perspective, I've been looking all the time for assurance from the service that we are aware of this and what we're doing. You're right, Chair, as well. I put my hand up to say primarily that our transformation programs around how we're trying to improve what we're doing for our children with SEND and their families. That is something that is being very closely monitored through Children's, and you're right, that's the right place for it. I will make inquiries after this one. I'm pretty sure we're bringing things to the 10th of February, but I'll make sure that's correct. The Children's Scrutiny on the 10th of February will have quite a bit of that information in there, I think, but I'll make sure that's right and let you know, and you can share that with your members here. There's absolutely no reason why people can't listen in either at the time or afterwards to what we take to Children's, and we can always report back to you on it as well. I'm absolutely indebted to the work on complaints. Complaints are gold, absolutely gold for any service. And I've been working really hard with our team to always be clear about, let's try to prevent, you can't always prevent every complaint, but let's make sure we pick up inquiries quickly. Let's try to reduce the number of complaint stage 2s, because that means we've still not done something right. And you're right, by the time you get to a local government ombudsman, we should be actually winning most of those, because we should be following our procedures. And quite rightly, it's not good enough at the moment, and we're working on it to make it better. So we're not hiding behind it, but I just want to give you some assurance that we are on it.
Thank you. Do I need to write to Councillor Redmond to bring this to his attention, or is the Scrutiny Committee fully aware of this information on top of it?
It would do no harm to email him, but I will be making sure I speak to Lee about it anyway, and I'll make sure that I understand what's coming to the next time. They won't be coming at it necessarily. They may not be coming at it necessarily from the complaints output, if that makes sense. They are already asking questions about delays, poor communication, and difficult outcomes for families with special education needs for their children.
Which of course results in the complaints and so it goes on. Okay, thank you very much, Helen. So who have I got next? I've got Surya had her hand up. I'll come back to Henry in a moment.
Thank you. Mine's really brief because it was actually going to echo what you say in terms of I was just a bit concerned about the number of cases that have been upheld by the Ombudsman. The query I had is the report is actually great. It's really detailed. It's more so just wondering, because I know the interaction I've had with the legal ombudsman and the financial ombudsman, I know that they are dealing with quite a lot of delays at the moment in terms of quite a few years. So it would just be helpful to know kind of how far back these cases that are being adjudicated in the last year, 23, 24, how far back they were being dealt with. So we kind of have a timeline. That's the only thing that would be more helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I could pick up a couple of things. At one point, it was about 18 months with the Ombudsman. They do seem to have got a lot more quicker, I lately. So it seems to, I know they did have an issue where they had staff, same as we all do, staffing issues drained from their service. So it seems to be, I would say, more sort of 6 monthly, some stuff much quicker. Some of them will be older, but most of them, and you always get a little bit because some come in at the end of the year and the start of the year, but it's not too ancient now, because obviously we don't want to be learning from stuff that's too old. The other thing about the number of the uphold rate, which is 90%, does look high. There is partly a reason for that, and I'll also pick up what you mentioned earlier also about the cost involved with the ombudsman. So excuse me. Part of the reason that the uphold rate is quite high is because as a council at the moment, up until now, we've not offered financial remedy without it being something that the ombudsman have ordered us to do. The ombudsman, and it's always been in the past, I think, to deter that sort of compensation culture. But actually the nature of the complaints that we get are changing. And I think it is now appropriate that we do start to proactively look at remedy, particularly around some of the SND complaints. So, the reason the 90% is high is because if people want some financial remedy, they go to the ombudsman to get that. And so the ones that don't go there, we've already sorted, that aren't seeking financial remedy or it isn't appropriate, we've generally sorted at stage 2. So that's why the number there, that high sort of figure over 100,000 in it paid as ordered by the ombudsman, only a proportion of that is avoidable. So whilst it's a big nasty number and it looks quite shocking, quite a lot of that remedy is actually things that we should have been paying for. So I gave an example earlier of a child should have been having SALT, speech and language therapy, for 4 months and we failed to provide it. And so the ombudsman say, well, pay this amount of money so that they can catch up on that. Well, of course, if we'd have done what we should have done in the first place, we'd have been paying that money anyway. So it's not additional money in all cases, but notwithstanding that, it is a poor service because obviously we want the child to have the SALT at the point that they need it, and sometimes that's just not available. We can't commission it, and so that just unpicks that figure a little bit, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. I think that was the point. It's just service failure or poor service is at the bottom of all this, which is something not for this committee, but we need to reference on to children's scrutiny. Apologies, Henry. I had Marcus and I've missed him out, so I'll come to Marcus first and then come back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a very comprehensive report, and it's actually a report that it's been a long time since I read a report in this detail. I know that shouldn't be the case, but I was flicking backwards and forwards, and it was and admittedly I stayed away from looking at the ombudsman and the SEND stuff because I sit on children's and families, and I was more concerned about the other areas that the complaints were coming from. And my natural assumption that housing would be quite high, and obviously it was. And then I'm looking at the ombudsman list there. I mean, I suppose I've got loads of questions. I've got loads of questions and comments. I don't know whether they're comments or questions. I mean, there was a question earlier about cases are resolved. Well, what's the definition of resolved? Are they resolved to the satisfaction of the complainant or to the satisfaction of the council? And I suppose another question would be is that how many people, if it had gone to an ombudsman, this is a bit hard. Yeah, how many people don't go to an ombudsman because, to be blunt, they can't be asked? So I shouldn't use that language in this meeting, because to be honest, if you get sent an email, well, you can always go to the ombudsman. Well, from my experience of ombudsman, other ones, I mean, I think I've said it before in a meeting, sometimes you need an ombudsman for the ombudsman. So actually, when you look at that success, I don't know, of course, it's not success rate, a success rate for the complainants, I suppose, and the ombudsman, it is quite high. Well, it's devastatingly high, I suppose. But then we go back to, why are citizens? I mean, who classes? I think we don't decide they're unreasonable customers. We decide their behaviour is unreasonable. Who makes that decision? I mean, my other half thinks I'm unreasonable every day, almost, and I disagree. But who makes that decision? And at some point, and I've had it in the past with complaints where you have to keep going because people don't listen. I mean, that's why people resort to violence in the end, is because people stop listening. That's what happens. And I think, I mean, I think the person in the room earlier, I mean, I think there's more, I mean, just to be then put in that category, I think is quite disturbing. And I do, from my own personal experience, and I know we're not talking about individual cases, but I do think sometimes there's a culture in this council of circling the wagons rather than dealing with the issue. Yeah, rather than hold your hands up and say, okay, maybe we should have done that better. And it's all, there's just a change of, do we need a fundamental change of culture on how we deal with our customers if somebody is wrong? I don't know. I mean, I'd just put that one out there, really. I mean, yeah, I mean, I must have an ambition in the old days to be an unreasonable customer when it came to the council. In the end, I just stood for council. I've probably been less effective as a councillor than a customer, I would have thought. And yeah, and I think there was a question, there was something earlier that was said, and it was, and I don't know whether it was Brenda who said it, but there was, I think it came from Rebecca. What checks and balances are there to make sure that there isn't a vendetta? And was that against the officer or against the customer? I wasn't quite sure. And I'd be very concerned if there was a vendetta from an officer to a customer just because the customers annoyed them. But of course, there is a point in this where an officer sat in a position of power in some respects. And so the customer can feel that then, they've got an advantage over that customer because they're the ones making decision. So I do think, I would love to have an answer to that culture question and how we change the culture as officers. Because I mean, I see firsthand how the housing team sometimes behaves. And I mean, you sit there in awe at how patient they are and how patient most officers are. I mean, I can be that patient with my customers. I'm in a very lucky position. Just chuck them out if you don't like them, and thank you very much, go away. And so I do, and I don't want to sort of tar the whole, it sounds like I'm tarring the whole thing, but I'm not, because I do sit there in awe at how patient officers are, and also how patient officers are with councillors. I see how some councillors ask questions and I see the replies they get, and I think these officers are angels the way they responded, because I would have liked to have said it in a totally different way. But then at the same time, I do think there are instances that maybe need addressing.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. I mean, I've written my notes when I was going through the papers, noting that service provision and quality accounted for 40% of the complaints, and that no directorate met its target time. And I wrote down cultural issue question mark. Well, we do have an executive director here, but I don't really want to drop him in it from a great height at short notice. But I don't know whether anybody wants to pick up on that point. But is it Chris?
Well, I would make the point that I don't believe it's a cultural issue in the sense that I don't think anyone sets out not to respond to customers. I do think there is a resourcing issue that prevents us from being able to find the answer quickly, because we are still, as you've heard today, dealing with multiple sets of data, even for one service, licensing using 5 systems as an example. So I don't think there's any lack of will on behalf of officers in order to respond to customers. That is what we are here for. That is our sole purpose, is to serve the community. But I definitely think there is a resourcing pressure, there is a data pressure, and that is bearing out between not only our response times, but also the fact that a number of complaints then get escalated because there is a perception of, well, it used to be done in a different way, or one geographical area is getting a different response, which might be perfectly legitimate, but they're now being compared because we're a single council.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go too deeply into that particular issue. Rebecca, and I'll come to Andy.
Just wondered, listening to the concerns, and I do understand the concerns about the unreasonable behaviour policy, whether what might be quite useful next year in the annual report is to give an overview. Obviously, it wouldn't be naming individuals, but give an overview to members how often that policy is used and what the circumstances around the behaviour were. Because in reality, I would say, I mean, I've not counted up, but I would say I use it less than, I can count on my both of my hands the times I use it in a year. So it's not used very frequently. And like you say, we get some very, challenging behaviour from housing customers, from some social care customers, but we understand the circumstances of their ire, really. We get why they're angry, they're in vulnerable positions. So we do, it's a last resort in that sense. And we only use it, that's more around the aggressive and the violent behaviour, which is obviously a very different matter to that which we've been looking at today. And really that use, when we use it in terms of persistence, is really just to try and make sure, as much as anything, that the communication comes through one front door, because the problem we often get is that emails go to 5, 6, 7 people and people are not sure who's answering and who's not. So it's not really intended, and I get the upset around it. The intention really was to make sure that actually things could come in and be appropriately triaged to the right people for response, and I don't think that's come across well, and that's regrettable. But as I say, I wonder whether it might be helpful if I include some statistics around that next year to sort of put people's minds at rest about how frequently that is being used or not.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out what the system is for sending the complaint to the appropriate officer for response, and whether that takes some of the 20, how much of the 20 days that takes up, and then reduces, and if it hits somebody on holiday, whether it goes on someone else, those kind of things. We always used to get what we call red jackets that would arrive from a minister or a MP, and with a set deadline on it, and it would come straight to the person they thought would deal with it, and you were stuck with it. You had to get on with it. Anyway, that's a digression. Right, I've got Andy Kendall hasn't spoken yet. Then I'll come back to Henry and Dawn.
I'll just pick on some that Marcus said just now about the people who can't be bothered to complain because of how do you complain. I'm just echoing what he's saying there. I just want to ask one small question. Could you just go to the slide before this one, please? Before that one, there's a picture. Before that one, that's it. I was listening with great interest all the way down till you got to the children area SW teams, then you switch sides. You put the word there, homeless. I just want to ask a quick question. How do you get this data? Is it factual and correct, or is this just a figure you've gotten somewhere, or is that all of Somerset?
Yep, so the data comes from our system, which is called iCasework. iCasework logs, in theory, hopefully, all complaints that we receive, the vast majority of which come by self-service through customers. So customers go online, they will log their complaint on the website, and they will put some categorization from drop-down lists about what their complaint is about. My team will look at those as they come in, because they come in not assigned to an individual. They'll look at them, read quickly the complaint, and if the complaint isn't categorized correctly, they will do that. So if somebody's put that it's about planning, but it's actually about homelessness, unlikely. But if they had done that, selected the one from the drop-down list incorrectly, my team will make sure that the classification is changed. There's a second belt and braces on that, insofar as they're then picked up by the service team. So if something comes in around SEND, there are members of staff within the team that look at them and then that assign them to the right officer within the team for response. And they would again look at the categorization and say, is this really for us or is it for someone else? So it's as reliable as any system, is in terms of data. If people put the right information in, we get the right information out, and we are assuming that everybody puts stuff in. Given that a lot of it's self-service, we are more confident that stuff is getting logged. There is the possibility that, and we have had it on occasions where complaints come in via a different route. So somebody emails direct into a known contact they know in a service, and it gets a lot of response, etc., and doesn't get logged to the system, maybe until it gets to a point of escalation, and we would then say, but actually this should have been in the system sooner and dealt with through the process. So we always try and do that little bit of, if we notice anything that's not gone quite right, to make sure we train the individuals and the services on getting them logged and making sure we have a single version of the truth in terms of complaints.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've still got 4 councillors wishing to speak, so we're beginning to run out of time. So if I could ask you all to be brief. Hazel first, then Kathy, Henry and Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very quick observation. I just wonder if we have any details about serial complainers. So when a person complains a lot, do we have any record of, data that gives us the outliers in terms of numbers? I do think that sometimes people become obsessed with complaining. The other thing is that I I think there's an unfairness in terms of councillors in that anybody could make a complaint about a councillor, and that is A, always dealt with, and B, that the councillors are not told that there's a complaint against them. And I don't think it's told until, unless it moves on. You might be told it's been dismissed, but you don't know what's going on. So things could be happening about me, and it's happened in the past, and I had no idea that that was going on until I was told, you know, it doesn't matter. And I think also as part of councillor training, and I know it's not, it's a different thing, but actually we need to be helped how to address these issues and individuals, because I've had occasions when I've desperately tried to help, desperately tried to find the truth, and so, you know, they're never happy with the answer. There's always something wrong, or that you haven't said, or they'll write to you and say, I want to know the date on which you spoke to that person. I said, well, I'm not, or I want to know who you spoke to. And I said, well, I'm not giving you that information. No, it's a private conversation. I'm just giving you the picture, and you know, like it or lump it. And then I mean, so what I'm saying is it's a very unfair, unlevel playing field. And when I've had, you know, I can be slagged off in the press or on different forums or attacked in the middle of the street verbally, and I go to officers for some help and get told, oh well. Once the police even said to me, oh, man up, David Cameron gets it every day. And I find that wholly unacceptable. And I've got a thick skin, but sometimes it gets to you. And I don't think we have, as a council, enough policies to protect councillors from complaints and to understand how to deal with some difficult situations when they arise. It's almost as if it's too hot for the officers to handle, and oh, just get on with it. You know, what do you expect? You put yourself up there, you've got to take it. And you know, I find it incredibly distressing, I think it would be the word at times, and that nobody really actually takes the vulnerability of councillors seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. I suspect that's because it's a different statutory regime, isn't it, under standards and things. Yeah, I take your point.
Shall I pick up some of the, yes, you're absolutely right. Complaints against a councillor goes through the standards route with the monitoring officer. But what I would say is that there is no reason in terms of the unreasonable customer behaviour policy that policy can't be applied if a councillor is receiving abuse from members of the public, in the same way that if it's abuse that meets a threshold to our staff, you know, there is a duty of care to all of us, you know, working in the public space. And whilst we have, you know, an expectation that there's a certain amount of flack that comes with the job, and believe me, I get a lot of that, that there are limits to what we should accept in that. And so we, you know, quite often I write, not under the policy, but as a preemptor to the policy, is actually to say, you know, these emails that you sent and the language you've used in relation to our staff isn't something we can tolerate. We understand that you have these issues and we will seek to address these, but please, when you're communicating, can you refrain from this? And sometimes, believe it or not, that actually does work if you just point that out. And we will always take that first step. If it's then really persistent and really nasty, then we look to how other things we might do to protect members of the staff, or indeed members from that flat where it's really unreasonable and unwarranted and making somebody quite unwell in some cases. So there's that. You also asked about the persistent customer or regular. I mean, of course we do have a number of people who are regular complainants, and we don't judge on that, to be honest, generally speaking. So where we do use that information is if somebody is receiving a service from us that's a personal service like SEND or social care, it's a very personal service, and they keep having to come back to us and complain, we do think there's something really not working for this family with the service. So we will speak to the service and say, right, this family have complained 4 times in the last 4 months. You know, either they're not getting the answers, or either something's really broken for this family. What can we do? There are other people who complain that perhaps it's not such a personal service, but they might, you know, have comments and complaints about how often we cut hedges, or, you know, how many potholes there are, and all those sorts of things, which is a bit less personal to them, but it's still representative of what the population is thinking. And some people just take a greater interest in that stuff than other people. So we don't compile any statistics around that, and we treat each complaint in the same way, as long as it's a valid complaint and not sort of frivolous or intended to harass, which, you know, obviously is a slightly different thing. But people are welcome to complain very many times and inform us of you know, their views and thoughts. And we don't pick that out, generally speaking, other than to be helpful, hopefully.
Okay, we are now running over, so if I could ask that the final questions and answers be kept fairly succinct, please. Kathy Pearce.
Thank you. Mine will be really quick. It's looking at the policy. I don't have any problems with the policy. It sets out very clearly what the process is, and that's what you need, isn't it? But with you can have the best written policy. If the resources aren't there to support it, then you're going to run into problems, which seems to be a lot of the debate here. And SEND is a historical issue, I think, and I'm glad that the committee is looking at that. But my question is, in terms of customer services, is it resourced adequately to cope with the number of inquiries? I mean, we're at the latter stages of the staff reorganisation presentations to us. Have we sort of missed the boat? Is this something that we've missed? It wasn't on my radar until it's come to committee this morning. Is there anything that this committee can send back in terms of resourcing for the actual customer services elements of it, or not? Thank you.
Well, I think it's not necessarily it may be a customer service resource issue, but I think it goes much broader than that, with everybody else sort of trying to cope with the difficulty is, of course, that as the service tends to stagger a little bit, the complaints go up, and then the pressure on the service becomes more, and you're almost into a vicious circle there. So, Henry,
Thanks,
almost
Mr. Chairman.
Final word.
I've had probably 10 cases to put through SEND in my division. I'm extremely lucky in that I'm chairman of my preschool, and the manager at my preschool knows exactly how to manipulate the system. The frustrations that the parents have is because they cannot get timely answers if they don't know how to operate the system. And I wish to support what Heather's doing with the SEND problems that she has inherited and are getting worse. The worst case I've had to deal with, which ended up with a very rich family paying a barrister, was when a SEND child went from children to adults. And that is a major, major difficult step. And I fully get it, and I don't have a problem. And I wish to just make a point. In South Somerset, when we had a violent complainant, it was cleared by the executive. It was not done purely on an officer's say. And I'm really serious about having democratic input into this policy.
That's fair enough. Now, Henry, you said right at the beginning of the debate you wanted to put forward a recommendation for us to send to executive?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. What I'm looking for is for some democratic oversight to be added to this policy at an executive level, because it doesn't need to be all the members, so that the executive know what is going on and why it is happening.
This is for the vexatious policy, which is being revived at the moment. So you're asking that as part of that revision, democratic oversight is considered as a component of it. Okay, I don't know what the pathway for that is, but no doubt Democratic Services will be able to assist us. I think I understand what, did you get that? I think I can remember it. No, I will.
Mr. Chairman, I've done it in the past with both climate and place and corporate and resources. And I would like to propose it, and I would look for a seconder.
Okay, Mark, are you proposing to second that?
Yeah, well, I've got sweet in my mouth. I've got sweet in my mouth now. Yes, I would quite happily second that. What Hazel was saying about, and again, I don't know whether it's in the policy because that's quite big, is complaints that come into the council that are complaints against the council that councillors are named in and then councillors don't find out. And I would love to find some way of adding that to the recommendation, having some sort of transparency with councillors so they don't know. I know there's a couple of times where that's happened in my own case, where the letters flying around in this council with my name on it. And you don't know about it. And actually, if they're out in the public domain, I'd probably be taking legal action. Now, I don't know whether we want to, whether that's being taken in this one or whether that's about the policy. But I'm quite happy to second Henry's recommendation. I don't know how you can add something like that.
That's a separate issue. I'd much rather take the recommendation based on the inclusion of democratic oversight in the vexatious persons policy. I think what I'd also like to do then is to request just a little bit of clarification about complaints that references councillors by name and how they are dealt with. And I think I'd like a reply to come back to this committee so that we all understand what the policy is around that. I think if what we receive we don't like the sound of, then I think we look to take a further step. But I wasn't aware that this was even an issue. But then again, if I've been complained about and nobody told me, I wouldn't know, would I? So yes, Rebecca.
The guidance has always been that when we've provided training to, because stage 1 complaints, I don't see, my team don't generally see unless they get escalated. So they are within the services. So the guidance that we always give to services in managing a stage 1 complaint is, you know, if a member is named in a complaint or if the complaint is around a particular contentious issue that is affecting a member's area, then, you know, please contact the member and just let them know that there is that going on. Whether that happens in reality is really difficult to police because it's across every service. So we can keep reiterating that requirement, we can keep training that requirement, but I'm not sure of the way in which we would be able to necessarily pull them out without, because I've got a team of 5 people that don't see every single complaint. It's a tricky one, but the guidance is let members know if they're named or if it's an issue in their area.
I mean, because there is a health and safety issue here. I mean, it's all very well writing to the council complaining, oh, Councillor Wren's useless, so I'm coming to you, which is fairly low key. But actually, if that then escalates to the person knocking on my door and telling me I'm useless and things like that, then so I think we have to know, you know, whatever level it's at, we have to know. And I think I'd like to reinforce that. So
there is some safeguarding.
Well, we have had safeguarding training, yes.
I just wonder if it
Let me take that one away and decide what I need to do. So I'm going to have to talk to other people about how we bottom that one out. But I'm quite happy to put forward the resolution. So we go back to Henry's resolution that we include democratic oversight in the revision of the vexatious persons at executive level. All in favour? Any against? I think that was unanimous, wasn't it? Right. Thank you very much. Right. We do need to crack on because our colleagues from housing have been here a little while. And we are now looking at the HRA Performance Management Report. Welcome Ian Candish and Simon Lewis. Who's going to take us through this? Simon?
Thank you, Chair. We'll do a bit of a double act on this one. So if I can just introduce a report which my colleague Shannon Lewis pulled together from the performance team. So just to say that what we do is we bring together a report which goes through to executive on our performance indicators, our key performance indicators for the housing landlord service. We've recently collated this because, as you'll appreciate, there are 2 landlords operating at the minute in terms of an in-house service. Yes, of course. So there's 2 landlords operating at the minute in terms of the in-house service, but we also have an arm's length management organisation, which is Homes in Sedgemoor. So this report brings that together and shows our combined performance. And these are the indicators that we've agreed with our director are the key ones as a health check for our service to ensure that it's delivering in the kind of the most important areas. And in this report, this version, and we'll continue to revise and update this, but we're showing, in some places we can show Homes and Sedgemoor's performance and the in-house landlord, and in some places we're just showing it as a combined figure, but we're moving towards all the performance being a combined figure, and that also reflects just the direction of travel, which we're looking at options appraisal to see how we bring our services working as one in future anyway. So that's why we do it that way. So this report went to executive and has been reported. The information has been reported previously, but we've been requested to bring it here. So we've extracted from the wide suite of many performance indicators that goes to executive. We've extracted just the ones that are relevant to the housing revenue account and landlord service. And there's 10 headline indicators in there, and they go through. Sorry, just give me a second. You can see them in the appendix, the indicators there. They were correct as at Q2. We've got some areas of concern where we know we're not performing against our target. So those are around a decent home standard. We're not there on gas safety certificate where we want to be at, because we have a target of 100% for gas safety, because obviously we need to make sure that every home is gas safe. We're at 99.7%, but we want 100% on that. Similarly, with the valid electrical safety certificates, our position is not at 100%. We want to be at 100% or as close as possible for that. And on Legionella risk assessed, again, we're almost 100%, but not quite there on that. And asbestos management surveys. So there's a lot of focus, and this is Ian's area. He can talk about these, but there's a lot of focus on trying to get these to 100%, and there's a lot of resource put into that. And then finally, I'd just like to say that we do measure. So one of our key tenant services measures is on the overall satisfaction. So we're reporting 74%, which was correct at Q2. We carry out a survey twice a year. The last survey results came back in just before Christmas and were 78% for the in-house landlord. And that's the highest satisfaction that we've had in the last, since we started reporting this way, in the last 3 years. So we're pleased with that. And when we benchmark against other housing providers in the sector, the top quartile is 79.8%. So we're almost at top quartile in terms of satisfaction. Homes and Sedgemoor as the Almo are performing better. They've got 84%. It's a really good result. And statistics show that Almos do tend to get higher satisfaction. So and their performance is in line with that. So that's the measures are all shared with you. And if you've got any questions, Ian and myself, we can answer those questions.
Thank you very much. Andy Kendall first, then Dawn Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been listening to you and you're saying you'd ideally like to have 100% with a house which has an electrical and gas inspection certificate. Is that legal? Because I go through this, I say this for one reason, when I'm told to do something like this, to me it's a serious matter, electrical and gas. And I know you want 100, and I know you're at 99 and 97, but surely isn't that just a flick of a wand to say to someone, go to that house and inspect it, and let me get, that's so close to 100, but is it not illegal not to have that certificates? That's my question, Chair.
Yeah, I think, Ian will no doubt respond, but I think the issue is relatively small numbers. What I'd like to know is just how many houses or households in total make up that 0.28% or whatever it is.
Just because this question's come up at a number of committees through the corporate performance, so I just want to make sure we're giving consistent answers here. So the regulations require us to have a fixed installation electrical test on a 5-yearly basis, and that's 100% requirement. If we fail to meet that requirement, we're in breach of that requirement. So it's not just that we aim to, that is the requirement. There are a number of things that prevent that from happening, and the same with gas that we'll talk about in a moment, but access to properties is very difficult. So whilst we own the properties and whilst we have a legal right of entry, the only way to enforce that legal right of entry is through the courts. So most people, you will book that inspection, whether it's gas or electrical, and they will be present and they'll let you into the property. The inspection will be undertaken. should remedial works be required, they'll be completed, and that's it. We do have a cohort of tenants that do not allow us into the property and actively refuse us. And we have a process for dealing with those. However, as a result of that process, there are some that fail to meet those regulatory requirements within that timetable. The process is that we will book an appointment with them, we'll write to them, we text them, we book another appointment, we go to the house. We will continually attempt to gain access, but the ultimate result is that we end up in court and we seek an injunction through the court, and we are at the mercy of the court to grant us that injunction. We've had members previously say, well, you can just take the police with you. Absolutely not. There is no legal requirement in the terms of criminality that would gain us access to that property. It is ultimately a civil matter, and therefore it is for the council to seek that injunction. So we have that with both electric and gas. We have an active process to progress those matters, but there are those properties that fall outside of the requirement on occasions.
I'll just come back on that, Chris, and just say two words: tenancy agreement.
Yeah, I know. We have this debate regularly. Members take the view that because we have a legal document that gives us a legal access, it only does if the court gives us an injunction. So we can knock on the door, but a tenant has a right to decline us access at that point in time. We are not allowed to force entry into their property, despite the fact that we own it. We can only do that with a court injunction. So it's not that we don't have this written into our tenancy agreements, it absolutely is. But the only way to enforce that is through an injunction.
Okay. Yes. Strange, isn't it? Dawn Johnson, please.
Is that, I've heard that before, Chris, and thanks for reminding us, but is that a different law then for councils as opposed to private landlords? And have you challenged that anywhere?
No, it's exactly the same regulations. 5-year fixed installation gas inspections is all exactly the same. The only difference is the way in which the council can't enforce against itself. So if a private landlord fails to meet those requirements, they can be reported to the council, and the council, through the private sector housing team, will attempt to enforce compliance. We can't do that on ourselves, and we have a housing regulator that does that. So we would report ourselves to the housing regulator as appropriate where there were breaches.
Thank you. And just to follow on, I had a question. This report doesn't normally come to any scrutiny committees then as such? That's what I just wanted to check, because I think some of the information is quite useful for anyone who's looking at the HRA to look at. But yeah, I understand you respond to that. I was just wanting to say that I was quite impressed by the tenant arrears, and it sounds like there's a really good system in place to support people. I had expected in the current financial crises that, you know, there'd be more difficulties or issues in keeping arrears at a low level, but it's quite encouraging to see those figures. Thank you.
I just wanted to remind the committee that you've specifically asked for this report. So normally the data that's contained within it would feature within the corporate performance scorecard. So it's all contained and presented, but it's done in a different format. You've specifically asked for a report so that you can consider it in this committee, as well as potentially in the performance reports that normally head into corporate resources, I believe.
Well, that's not scrutiny.
I mean, I echo Dawn's comments. I think this is a very useful report and very, very interesting in terms of a pretty vital area of the council's operations. So it would be, I'd quite like to continue to see it, and if we could see it before the executive or whatever, that would be quite nice. One point I have mentioned to officers that I hadn't noticed here, that actually turned up on an audit report I was looking at back in August, was the issue of damp and mould. And there was the audit report was slightly critical, or it did, I can't remember, it gave a qualified approval about our performance in terms of damp and mould. So I have asked that this be added as a KPI, and I think Ian Candish, you've agreed with that. Do you want to expand on where we are with that? Or, I mean, the trouble with damp and mould, it's a very It's a very easy thing to get and a very difficult thing to get rid of. Ian, did you just want to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. So yeah, we had the report last year, beginning of last year, on damp and mould. There were 6 recommendations contained within that. All of them have been taken forward and progressed. Not all of them are to completion. So there are some items, for example, in relation to training of staff generally, which has happened to the vast majority of the staff that go into the properties, how to spot damp and mould and what the process is to then follow that through. And there was also a particular draw your highlight to a query about the reporting mechanism as well, which we're working on at the moment, but I'm quite happy for it to be added to any KPIs. I think I agree with you. That is a key one. It's very much in the public domain. And there was also, in reference to the discussion you're having here earlier about complaints, how that should be dealt with, and that we particularly focus on the detail around damp and mould in terms of complaints as well, which again, we're looking at our systems to be able to highlight that more readily. But we have dealt with the aspect, there was a query at the time about the quality of the data, so that's been resolved. So it is all being taken forward. Yeah.
And am I right in thinking the one block that had the Legionella, that was short of the Legionella risk assessment, is now being completed?
Yes, they're 100%. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, are there any other questions? I think we're expected to note the report. Okay, well, it's 10-1. I think we can now draw matters to a conclusion. I want to thank you all for your time and your trouble today, for the officers who presented, members who've quizzed everybody and made some quite pertinent points. And we'll see you all again on the 12th of March, well, most of you, I hope, but at the Luttrell Room in County Hall. We're going home. Although I have to say, as a Taunton Dean councillor, this feels quite like home, but there we go. All right, thank you all very much, and get home safely.